What happens when terror is only the beginning of a sinister bloodline? Darkness engulfs the world, and the silence is broken only by the heavy breathing of someone about to face the impossible. Slow footsteps echo in the void as Kwon Yongjin walks towards the unknown, feeling a weight that doesn't belong to this realm. The ground beneath his feet feels unstable, as if reality itself is unraveling, and the air grows dense, almost impossible to breathe. Suddenly, the horizon explodes in hues of crimson and purple, revealing a colossal presence that defies all human logic. Impenetrable scales and a silhouette that writhes across the skies like an ancient god reclaiming its lost territory. Kwon Yongjin freezes, his body refusing to obey as his eyes capture the magnitude of the horror looming over the silent metropolis. It's a serpent? No, something far more ancient and ravenous, watching his every move with an age-old intent. The creature's talons rip through the concrete of buildings with the ease of tearing paper, scattering dust and despair wherever it goes. The shock is absolute when the beast fully reveals itself, a dragon with scarlet eyes, a manifestation of power that makes any mortal's heart stop. Yongjin tries to retreat, but terror anchors him to the ground, and the beast's silent roar reverberates within his very soul. Just then, the scene abruptly changes, and he finds himself before a human figure exuding an aura of an absolute predator. A man with long hair and an icy gaze, his yellow eyes gleaming with the promise of a destiny Yongjin does not wish to bear. The human creature smiles, a gesture laden with scorn and power, as if knowing that escape is merely a temporary illusion for the young man. Feeling the icy touch of that gaze, a scream finally tears from Yongjin's throat, ripping the veil between nightmare and reality. He wakes abruptly, sweat pouring down his face and his lungs begging for oxygen as the pale morning light invades his room. The silence that follows is almost unsettling, broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the low hum of an old fan. Kwon Yongjin sits up in bed, his mind still clouded by the images of that colossal entity that felt as real as the ground beneath his feet. Was it just a dream? The question echoes, but the profound exhaustion in his bones suggests the battle was far more than mental. He stares at the stained ceiling of his small apartment, feeling the morning chill seep through the cracks of the poorly sealed window. As he gets up, his bare feet touch the cold floor, a physical reminder of the mediocre and difficult life he leads every day. Hunger soon makes itself known, a familiar ache in his stomach that forces him to check what remains of his meager food supply. Opening the rice cooker, the shock of reality hits him. Only a few dry, lifeless grains remain at the bottom of the pot. Yongjin checks the rice bag, which is too light, almost empty, revealing that poverty is a much more immediate monster than the dragon. He sighs, a mix of defeat and acceptance, as the weight of his solitary existence seems to crush his tired teenage shoulders. With no other choice, he walks to the bathroom, trying to ignore the exhausted reflection staring back at him from the moisture-stained mirror. The water runs, cold and sharp, as he tries to wash away the remnants of the nightmare and prepare for another day of urban survival. While brushing his teeth, his thoughts return to the dragon and the man with yellow eyes, but he pushes them away with the coldness of a realist. The real world has no room for magic or ancestors when every penny must be counted for the next quick meal. He leaves his home, the narrow streets and red brick buildings composing the backdrop of his monotonous and gray routine under the sun. Kwon Yongjin walks with his hands in his pockets, his heavy backpack symbolizing the burden of a future he can barely envision or desire. On his way, a familiar sound makes him stop, a low bark coming from a pile of trash bags in a side alley. He watches a small white French bulldog rummaging through the scraps, searching for something to appease its own persistent hunger. The animal seems as out of place and forgotten as Yongjin himself, struggling to find dignity amidst the detritus of the big city. Just then, a pang of empathy pierces the young man's armored heart, and he decides to enter a nearby convenience store to do something. He scans the shelves filled with options, but his eyes fix on the prices that seem to climb with every beat of his heart. Upon seeing the cans of dog food, the price on the label makes him hesitate. It's a luxury he can barely afford. Kwon Yongjin holds the package, mentally calculating how much this will affect his already shattered budget for the rest of the exhausting week. He ends up opting for a simple sausage, something cheaper, but still representing a personal sacrifice for the sake of another being. Back in the alley, he extends the food to the small dog, which looks at him with an almost human, judging intelligence. With a gentle motion, Yongjin offers the treat, silently asking the animal not to eat the dirty trash scattered on the ground. The bulldog accepts the offer, and for a brief moment, there's a silent connection between the two outcasts of that frenetic, selfish society. He strokes the dog's head, feeling the texture of its fur and the fragility of life, before getting up to continue on his way. As he walks away, he leaves the rest of the sausage on the ground, a final offering before diving back into the indifferent crowd of the streets. The dog watches the young man leave, its eyes fixed on Kwon Yongjin's back as if it knows something the young man himself ignores. Meanwhile, the city awakens with the noise of cars and the hurried movement of people who see nothing beyond themselves. Yongjin arrives at school, his dark uniform and green tie serving as his armor against the constant judgment of his more fortunate peers. The buzz of the corridors is suffocating, filled with trivial gossip and teenage worries that seem absurdly distant from the raw reality of his life. He checks his phone, finding only automated birthday messages from companies, a bitter reminder that no one truly cares about his existence. The screen's glow reflects his empty gaze as he enters the classroom, wishing only to be invisible for a few more hours. However, destiny has other plans, and the sound of conversations about astrology and tarot card readings invades his ears. Classmates discuss mysticism and destiny with a casualness that irritates our protagonist's logical and weary mind, who bottles it all up. Kwon Yongjin takes his seat, putting on his headphones to drown out the noise and futility that seem to overflow from every corner. He watches groups forming, the school's social dynamics being just another battle arena where he prefers not to fight. A girl comments on Yongjin's birthday, but he responds with restrained disdain, unwilling to make room for any kind of celebration. His skepticism is almost palpable when someone mentions that destiny can be read through cards or the alignment of the stars. To him, the easy money made by shamans and psychics is just more proof of how the world is driven by scams and lies. He smiles bitterly, thinking that if destiny were real, he wouldn't be counting coins to buy a simple bread at the cafeteria. The silence within his mind is broken when a group of students approaches, bringing with them the chaos and energy he detests. Just then, Young-Soo-ho and his friends enter the scene, their noisy presence instantly and annoyingly changing the classroom's atmosphere. Suho, with his expansive and sometimes aggressive demeanor, doesn't miss the opportunity to provoke the taciturn and always exhausted Kwon Yongjin. He throws packages of industrial cake onto the boy's desk, ironically calling them birthday cake, to the delight of the others present. Yongjin stares at the packages with a glacial gaze, the kind of look that could freeze anyone, but Suho just laughs at the reaction. Tension rises when other students start betting on whether someone will get hurt that day, based on a supposed prophetic dream. The atmosphere becomes a strange mix of playful teasing and a dark premonition that hangs over everyone's heads like a cloud. Suho challenges Yongjin, betting money that the boy will be the first to suffer an injury before the sun sets today. The teasing continues, with light jabs and pushes aimed at testing the already exhausted patience of the descendant who has not yet accepted his role. Kwon Yongjin tries to remain calm, but anger begins to boil in his veins as he is surrounded by these complete scoundrels. He watches the money being put on the line, an amount that is insignificant to others, but for him it represents days of sustenance. Suho continues the provocation, tapping Yongjin's head while laughing at his own cleverness and momentary superiority within that school hierarchy. Yongjin's anger is a menacing, almost suffocating aura, but he decides it's not worth losing control over Suho. He just takes a deep breath and tries to focus on the bread he received, deciding that at least his hunger will be satisfied at the expense of their idiocy. But the atmosphere changes when a new presence enters the room. Someone who doesn't follow the common social rules of that high school in Seoul. Heesu emerges like a hurricane of intensity, her long black hair and focused gaze carving a path through the curious students. She walks towards Yongjin with a determination that shocks everyone, including the boy himself, who doesn't understand what's happening. Upon getting close, an accident occurs, and the tarot cards Heesu was carrying fly through the air, scattering across the classroom floor. Time seems to freeze as the cards fall, each revealing symbols that seem to scream urgent messages to those who can read the signs. Kwon Yongjin bends down to help, and upon touching one of the cards, a strange sensation runs up his arm, like an electric shock. He picks up the Hanged Man card, staring at the image of sacrifice and inverted perspective, feeling that it is a reflection of his own life. As he returns the cards to Heesu, he encounters a gaze so deep and intense that it seems capable of reading all his secrets. Heesu grabs Yongjin's wrist with unexpected force, her fingers pressing into his skin with an urgency that borders on absolute desperation. The other students watch in absolute silence, sensing that something bigger and more dangerous is unfolding right before their mundane eyes. Heesu smiles in a way that subverts all expectations, a smile that mixes tenderness with a terrifying, blood-chilling possessiveness. She asks if it's his birthday today, her voice sounding like a soft melody but laden with a supernatural and ancient weight. Yongjin, confused and uncomfortable, simply confirms with a nod, wanting to get rid of that touch that feels like fire burning his skin. Just then, Heesu declares before everyone that she will read his future, completely ignoring the protests and the atmosphere of shock that has settled. She shuffles the cards with mesmerizing dexterity, each movement revealing a practice that goes far beyond a simple teenage game. The tension in the room is almost solid, and even Young-Soo-ho recoils, sensing that interfering now would be a fatal and unforgivable mistake. Heesu extends the deck, demanding that Kwon Yongjin choose a card, her gaze leaving no room for the boy's refusal or hesitation. He hesitates, feeling every fiber of his being warning him to flee, but Heesu's morbid curiosity and magnetism stop him. Upon touching the cards again, the images of the dragon and the yellow-eyed man flash in his mind with terrifying clarity. Heesu observes Yongjin's every reaction, her face flushing in a way that suggests a connection he doesn't fully understand yet. She lets out a light, almost childlike laugh, violently contrasting with the aura of power that emanates from her small, fragile body. The girl declares that they are destined, a revelation that makes Yongjin's heart pound with fear and unprecedented confusion. Just then, the mysterious atmosphere is broken by a teacher's abrupt entrance, forcing everyone to return to their seats and feign normality. Lee Heesu backs away, but not before casting one last look at Yongjin, a look that promises this is only the beginning of everything. Classes continue, but Kwon Yongjin's mind is miles away, trapped in the images of the cards and Heesu's touch. He tries to focus on his books, but the letters seem to transform into scales, and the diagrams into reptilian eyes watching him. Weariness hits him again, but this time it's accompanied by a growing paranoia, as if the shadows in the room are coming to life. He observes his classmates, who have already returned to their silly routines, completely ignoring the fact that something has irrevocably changed in that school environment. The teacher continues talking about history, unaware that ancestral history itself is about to brutally collide with the present. Suddenly, the bell rings, signaling the break and bringing back the controlled chaos of crowded corridors, filled with life and incessant noise. Yongjin tries to leave quickly but is intercepted by Lee Heesu, who seems to have developed the ability to appear exactly where he is. She follows him down the corridor, her presence drawing curious glances and whispers that spread like wildfire among the students. Heesu holds a final card Yongjin hadn't seen, the Death card, symbolizing the end of one era and the beginning of another. She explains that death isn't the end, but a necessary transformation for the descendants' true power to finally awaken from the ashes. Yongjin ignores her, quickening his pace, but her voice continues to echo in his mind, slowly eroding his defenses and rational logic. He takes refuge on the rooftop, seeking a moment of peace, but the city below seems like a silent battlefield awaiting the first strike. The sunlight is blinding, but it can't dispel the cold sensation that has settled in his chest since the moment he woke up. He finds a masked classmate who tries to strike up a conversation, but Yongjin is too exhausted to maintain any normal social interaction today. The masked boy observes Yongjin's erratic behavior, sensing that his friend is on the verge of an imminent emotional or physical collapse. They briefly discuss school pressure, but Yongjin's mind is focused on the shadow he swears he saw through a window. Looking down, he sees Lee Heesu standing in the courtyard, looking directly at him with that smile that now haunts him even while awake. The shock is real. How did she know he would be there? The feeling of being hunted becomes a suffocating, terrifying certainty. He goes back inside, but the sight of a dark figure passing by an empty window makes him stop abruptly, his heart pounding in his throat. No one was there, but the presence was so real that he could feel the air cool around him for a few interminable seconds. He enters another classroom, trying to blend into the crowd, but the feeling of being out of place only intensifies with each step he takes. Kwon Yongjin stares at his own reflection in a storefront, seeing a young man who seems to be carrying the weight of 1,000 years on his shoulders. He wonders if he's going crazy, if the lack of food and stress have finally broken his mind and driven him to madness. Just then, Suho's group reappears, blocking his path and dragging him back to the cruel reality of bullying and cheap taunts. Suho laughs, recalling the bet about someone getting hurt, and seems determined to forcibly make his prophecy come true. He blocks Yongjin's passage, his stature and aggression creating a physical barrier that the boy doesn't have the energy to face right now. The other students back away, anticipating that a violent confrontation is about to erupt in the middle of the crowded school hallway. Kwon Yongjin clenches his fists, a menacing aura beginning to emanate from his body as his patience finally reaches its absolute limit. Suddenly, a crack echoes. Suho attempts a low blow, but something stops him before he can hit his intended target with the stick. It's Heesu again, who interposes herself between the two, with a courage that leaves everyone in the circle in a state of absolute shock. She holds Suho's arm with a firmness that seems impossible for someone her size, her eyes glowing with protective fury. Heesu loudly declares that no one is allowed to touch her boyfriend, a statement that makes everyone's jaw drop to the floor. The silence that follows is sepulchral, broken only by Suho's ragged breath, who doesn't know how to react to this total subversion. Kwon Yongjin stares at Heesu, the word boyfriend echoing in his mind like thunder on a sunny day, leaving him without any reaction. Suho tries to laugh, but the laughter sounds false and nervous, as he realizes that the power dynamic in that room has changed drastically and dangerously. He questions Heesu's sanity, but the girl merely stares at him with an icy gaze, the kind of look that could freeze an entire ocean. Heesu reaffirms her position, her voice now laden with an authority that makes even the bullies retreat purely out of survival instinct. She shoves Suho's arm away, a simple gesture that carries the weight of a royal command that accepts no disobedience. Suho, feeling humiliated in front of everyone, attempts one last taunt, but the combined presence of Yongjin and Heesu is too much for him to bear. He mutters something about Yongjin being an orphan living in a basement, trying to hit the boy at his most vulnerable and painful spot. The comment hits its mark, and Kwon Yongjin's mind is filled with flashes of his miserable, lonely life, fueling his anger and pain. But Heesu doesn't let the blow connect. She wraps her arm around Yongjin's, offering a support he didn't know he needed or desired. She tells Suho to get lost, her voice now a deadly whisper that makes the bully tremble and finally decide to retreat. Suho walks away, but his eyes promise revenge, making it clear that this conflict is far from having a peaceful or definitive end today. Kwon Yongjin finally breaks free from Heesu, his confusion now turning into a defensive irritation against the girl who is exposing him like this. He asks why she's doing this, why she's spreading false rumors about them being a couple in front of the entire school. Heesu just smiles confidently, stating that she wishes the rumors were true and that she genuinely likes him. Yongjin rejects her immediately, his mind able to process any kind of affection amidst the chaos his supernatural life has become. He walks away, wanting distance from Heesu and everything she represents, fate, tarot, and this forced, strange connection. However, Heesu doesn't give up. She follows him to the cafeteria, continuing her campaign of insistent proximity that shocks all the other students. She sits at his table, acting as if they've been intimate for years, completely ignoring Kwon Yongjin's reactions of dread and shock. The boy tries to focus on his food tray, but his appetite has vanished, replaced by a feeling of being watched by something beyond Heesu. Looking to the side, he sees other students whispering, their minds probably concocting 1,000 stories about the strange couple that has now formed. He realizes his ordinary, invisible life is over. Now he's the center of attention, something he always tried to avoid at all costs. Heesu offers him some of her food, a gesture of affection that seems so out of place in that atmosphere of constant tension and mystery. Yongjin refuses again, his rigid, defensive posture his only way to maintain what little remains of his sanity and individual autonomy. The girl doesn't seem to mind the rejection. She continues to speak of the future, of how things are about to change for him. Kwon Yongjin stares into the bottom of his juice mug, feeling himself sinking into a swamp of events he cannot control or comprehend. He rises to leave, but Heesu grasps his hand one last time, her touch now conveying a calm he hadn't felt in ages. She tells him to be careful, for what he saw in the window was not a delusion, but a warning that the shadows are closing in rapidly. The shock hits Yongjin with full force. How did she know what he saw? The question hangs in the air, without an immediate or logical answer. He rushes out of the cafeteria, feeling like he needs air, space, anything that isn't Heesu or her gloomy predictions. As he walks through the now empty corridor, a shiver runs down his spine, the same cold he felt when facing the dragon in his dream. He looks back, but there's no one there, just the oppressive silence of a school that seems to be hiding secrets in every one of its shadows. Suddenly, a movement in the far window catches his attention, and this time, he clearly sees a figure that shouldn't be there. A pair of eyes watches him from outside on the second floor, defying gravity and logic, leaving Kwon Yongjin with a single certainty: the piece of his mundane life has just died. On the table, the small strawberry milk carton rests like an ironic symbol of an affection he simply cannot process. The bespectacled boy stares at him with a mix of envy and mockery, asking what everyone wants to know about this sudden, strange relationship. Yongjin ignores the provocation as he stares at the packaging, feeling that every one of Heesu's gestures is a meticulously laid trap to ensnare his weary soul. Whispers spread like wildfire through the corridors, turning the invisible boy into the center of a spectacle he never asked for. Heesu doesn't back down and continues her advance, acting with an intimacy that makes Yongjin's stomach churn in a swirl of dread and exhaustion. She smiles angelically, but there's something in the gleam of her eyes that hints at a supernatural storm about to break over them all. The boy adjusts his backpack and tries to focus on reality, wanting to believe that this is all just a bad school prank. At that, he decides enough is enough and walks away, leaving behind the girl and the curious glances that follow him like shadows. Every step on the cold corridor floor echoes Yongjin's solitude, a steady rhythm trying to drown out the cries of his own destiny. But Heesu is persistent, following him with the determination of someone who has already seen the future written in the stars or in stained tarot cards. She calls him again, and the sound of her voice cuts through the air like a sharp blade, forcing the boy to stop against his will. Yongjin turns with an icy gaze, the kind that could freeze anyone's heart, but the girl merely smiles back. The silent confrontation between the two draws even more attention, creating a dome of tension, where time seems to simply stop running normally. He demands she stop this ridiculous charade, but Heesu seems to revel in the evident frustration that emanates from every pore of the boy. The situation reaches a climax of strangeness when she claims they are a couple, a lie spoken with the conviction of an absolute truth. Yongjin merely sighs, feeling the weight of exhaustion crush any will to fight against that madness, and decides he needs to get out of there immediately and fast. The image of a black-haired woman briefly flashes in his mind, a vision that blends with the oppressive reality of the school day ending. The city streets are filled with strangers, each immersed in their own mediocre life, as the sun begins to set on the horizon. Yongjin walks alone, the silhouette of a young man bearing the burden of a lineage he staunchly refuses to accept or even understand. The orange glow of dusk reflects on Yongjin's tired face, highlighting the deep, dark circles of someone who doesn't know what a peaceful night is. He frantically checks his phone, his hands typing messages that might never bring the answers he truly needs to survive the spiritual chaos. Yongjin's expression hardens as he crosses the busy streets, feeling like a stranger in a world that seems increasingly distant. Every city light shines with an intensity that hurts his eyes, a constant reminder that darkness is always lurking in the corners. At that, he enters a familiar alley, a shadowy shortcut that smells of rain and oblivion, where civilization seems to lose its strength and its color. It's then that he sees the small white French bulldog, the same creature he encountered before, rummaging through the trash for something to eat. Yongjin stops and stares at the animal, feeling a strange and inexplicable connection with this creature that seems as out of place as he is in the world. The dog looks back with almost human intelligence, a critical gaze that seems to judge the boy's soul with an ancestral arrogance. Despite his own poverty, Yongjin simply cannot ignore the creature and decides to take it with him to his tiny, cold apartment. He walks with heavy steps, carrying convenient store bags containing the bare minimum needed to endure another night of isolation and extreme exhaustion. The building corridor is dark and silent, a concrete labyrinth that seems to suffocate any hope for a better or more dignified life. Upon entering his room, Yongjin lets out a momentary sigh of relief, though he knows the walls cannot protect him from what is to come. He throws his backpack to the floor and begins to prepare for the rest of the day, oblivious to the fact that he is not alone. The sound of the hairdryer fills the small room as he tries to dry the bulldog, which seems to hate every second of that mundane care. The boy fumbles with the device, his inexperience in caring for anything beyond himself making the scene almost comical, if not for the underlying sadness. The small animal shakes its wet fur with genuine disdain, its posture suggesting it is an emperor being served by a mere peasant. Yongjin grumbles something about the trouble the dogs is causing, but there's a soft gleam in his eyes, a remnant of humanity enduring. He observes the animal with curiosity, wondering where it came from and why he feels that creature understands every word he says. With hands trembling from hunger, he prepares a simple bowl with cheap sausages, sharing the little he has with his new and mysterious companion. The boy comments on the dog's situation, theorizing that it was abandoned or perhaps never had a real owner in its life. The bulldog attacks the food with ferocity, completely ignoring the young man's words, focused only on satisfying its hunger, be it of a street animal or a spirit. Yongjin watches it eat, reflecting on his own solitude and how they both are merely discarded remnants unseen by a society that doesn't care. The atmosphere is plunged into a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of the dog chewing and the rain beginning to fall outside. Suddenly, the animal stops eating and stares fixedly at the young man, as if it's about to reveal a secret that would change everything. A small paw touches Yongjin's chest with unexpected force, a gesture of authority that makes the young man's heart skip a beat. The touch is firm and charged with a strange energy, making the young man suddenly feel small before that four-legged creature. Yongjin instinctively recoils, shocked by the dog's audacity and the feeling of being judged by something much larger and more ancient. He shouts in surprise and indignation, asking what's wrong with the creature, but the answer doesn't come in the form of a bark. The bulldog merely stares at him with those large expressive eyes, full of knowledge that defies the young student's logic and sanity. Yongjin tries to catch his breath, feeling cold sweat trickle down his neck as the room's atmosphere suddenly becomes oppressive and heavy. He looks at the dog and then at the window, feeling like the world outside is closing in around him like a trap. The day has been full of unpleasant surprises, and the young man feels he's on the verge of a mental collapse, wishing for everything to just disappear. He stares into the depths of the room, where shadows seem to come alive, dancing to the accelerated rhythm of his short, desperate breaths. The dog calmly walks around the room, acting as if it owns the place, while Yongjin watches its every move with growing, bitter distrust. The clock on the wall ticks the hours with a metallic, merciless sound, reminding the young man that time for normality is running out. Suddenly, a loud knock resounds at the door, making Yongjin jump in fright and his heart pound violently and painfully against his ribs. He stares at the door with dread, knowing he isn't expecting anyone at this hour of the night and that visitors never bring good news. The sound repeats, louder and more insistent, echoing through the empty apartment like a premonition that fate has finally come to collect its debt. Yongjin approaches the door cautiously, his steps silent on the cold floor as he tries not to make any sound that would betray his presence. He looks through the peephole, and what he sees instantly freezes his blood, a figure he would recognize anywhere, even in the pouring rain. It's Heesu, standing in the dark hallway, with a gaze that pierces through the wooden door, and strikes the young man's soul with precision. She wears white Crocs and is completely drenched, water droplets falling from her hair and clothes, forming dark puddles at her small feet. Yongjin opens the door, incredulous and annoyed, demanding to know how on earth she managed to find out where he lived amid so many identical streets and buildings. Heesu simply walks in, ignoring his protest, bringing with her the smell of rain and an aura of mystery that fills every corner of the apartment. She looks around with an enigmatic smile, assessing the poverty of the place with a curiosity that makes Yongjin feel exposed and profoundly humiliated. The girl starts drying her hair with a towel, acting with a naturalness that borders on madness, while the young man glares at her with pure hatred. He demands that she leave immediately, but Heesu seems not to hear, focused on her own agenda and the plan that brought her there. Outside, the rain falls harder, turning the city into a gray, hostile blur beneath a sky laden with heavy, dark clouds. The two step out into the hallway, the tension between them glowing brighter than the building's dim lights, a silent duel of opposing wills. Yongjin tries to keep his distance, but Heesu closes in, her presence occupying all the space and forcing the young man to face the reality of the situation. He questions her intentions, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and frustration, wanting to know what a girl like her wants with someone like him. Heesu smiles provocatively, revealing that she followed him all the way, a confession that makes the young man question his own sense of security. She asks if he truly thinks she's crazy, but there's a seriousness in her voice that suggests madness is just the beginning. Under the umbrellas that now shield them from the storm, they seem like two lost souls in a sea of wet asphalt and dark ancient secrets. Yongjin is fed up with games and just wants to go back to his bed, but the girl has a proposition he never imagined hearing in his life. She talks about the cold and how he should be kinder, but the young man has no room for kindness in such a hardened heart. Heesu's gaze softens for a second, a mask of vulnerability she uses to try and break Yongjin's iron resistance and his coldness. He turns to leave, but the girl's next sentence locks him in place as if struck by a bolt of pure energy. She asks what he wants from her, offering anything for him to accept her presence and her help on this dangerous and uncertain path. Yongjin laughs with sarcasm, doubting she has anything he truly needs, his mind focused only on daily survival and constant hunger. But Heesu isn't bluffing, and the determination on her face shows she's willing to pay any price to stay by his side. She pulls out her phone, and the screen's glow illuminates the young man's shocked face, revealing something he never thought possible for a student. Yongjin's eyes widen at the sight of the girl's bank balance, an astronomical sum that could solve all his financial problems in an instant. It's millions of won, a fortune that gleams before him like a promise of salvation or a direct ticket to someone's personal hell. Heesu explains that her family has a lot of money and that she's willing to pay 100,000 won an hour just to hang out with him. The transfer notification arrives on Yongjin's phone, the sound of money entering his account echoing like thunder amidst the silent rain. He stares at the screen, processing the reality that he just sold himself for a life-changing sum, feeling like the biggest scoundrel. Heesu smiles confidently, knowing she hooked the young man through his greatest weakness, the desperate need to escape the misery he lives in. As they walk, other students seem like mere extras in a play where only the two of them matter, an unlikely couple forged by money and mystery. Yongjin tries to act as if he doesn't care, but the weight of the money in his account burns like a hot coal in his pocket, reminding him of his choice. He imposes conditions, demanding they act like strangers at school, trying to keep what little dignity he has left intact in the face of this bizarre situation. Heesu asks if he's worried about rumors, her voice tinged with a soft mockery that deeply irritates the young man and puts him on the defensive. She extends her hand in a gesture of affection that seems as out of place as her very presence in Yongjin's lonely and harsh life. The girl watches his reaction with predatory patience, aware that each of his defenses is falling, one by one, before her power. Yongjin stares at her hand, feeling a reluctance bordering on panic, but necessity speaks louder than his wounded pride and honor. Their fingers almost touch, a physical connection that promises to seal the pact between the reluctant descendant and the girl who knows too much about him. He clenches his hand tightly around the umbrella handle, refusing contact, trying to maintain a final barrier against Heesu's emotional invasion. The girl makes a cruel comment about him having no parents, an open wound she prods without any mercy or real empathy. Yongjin stops in the middle of the street, rage boiling in his veins, every word of hers a sonic blow against his already fragile sanity. He squeezes the umbrella until his knuckles turn white, fighting the urge to scream and flee from everything right then and there. He says he must have been crazy for a moment to accept the money, deciding he'll return it all and end this farce immediately. Heesu simply watches him, her smile fading, replaced by an expression of seriousness that makes the air around them suddenly chill. She asserts that he has no choice and that from now on, things will go her way whether he likes it or not. The atmosphere changes drastically when she pulls a card from her pocket, a quick movement that captures young Yongjin's mesmerized gaze. It's a tarot card, but not just any card. It's the Death card, with its dark and terrifying image of a skeletal knight advancing. Heesu shows him the card, stating with a glacial voice that the tarot never lies, and that his destiny is definitively sealed. Yongjin tries to laugh at the absurdity, but her words echo with a prophetic weight that makes his heart pound with pure despair. She insists he will die today, a prediction spoken with such conviction that the young man feels a shiver run down his entire spine. Panic begins to take hold of Yongjin as Heesu stares at him with eyes that seem to see beyond flesh and bone, straight into his soul. She screams for him to stop, her voice charged with a supernatural authority that makes the ground seem to tremble beneath the poor, exhausted young man's feet. Yongjin recoils, feeling that the girl in front of him is no longer just a classmate, but something much more dangerous and uncontrollable now. Rainwater splashes under his feet as he tries to find a way out of this situation that has completely spiraled beyond his rational control. They are alone on the deserted street, a perfect stage for a tragedy that has been written for generations in the shadows of that cursed lineage. The young man asks why she is doing this, his voice failing as real terror begins to replace the irritation he felt before. He feels something grab his leg, an invisible force or a spectral hand that prevents him from escaping the fate Heesu coldly prophesied. Yongjin looks down, and the dread on his face reflects the understanding that the spiritual world has finally reached him in a physical and brutal way. He tries to break free, desperately fighting against whatever is holding him, but every movement only seems to sink him deeper into the supernatural swamp. He screams that she is frustrating and that his pride is stubborn, but his words sound hollow before the power emanating from the girl now. Hundreds of hands seem to emerge from nowhere, grabbing Yongjin from all sides, a chilling touch that instantly siphons the warmth from his body. The shock hits the young man with full force. How did she know what he saw? The question hangs in the air, without a logical or immediate answer. He realizes his ordinary life is over. Now he is at the center of a war he didn't even know existed until today. Heesu stares at him with a smile that doesn't reach her eyes, demanding that he surrender to her and accept the burden he carries in his blood. Gigantic white hands emerge from the shadows behind her, transforming the scene into a living nightmare that defies all human sanity or logic. The young man covers his face in a gesture of pure despair, wanting to wake up from this terrible dream that has become his mundane and miserable life. Heesu continues speaking, her voice now a whisper, filling Yongjin's mind with promises of power and warnings of impending ruin. She laughs at his situation, at how pathetic he is living in that filthy room, hiding his true nature from his few friends. Yongjin's dread peaks when he realizes that the shadowy figure he saw in the window has finally manifested before his eyes. A colossal, masked creature emerges from the darkness, its suffocating presence extinguishing any light left on that rainy, deserted city street. With that, the impact is violent. The air is expelled from the young man's lungs as he is slammed against a parked car with brutal force. He tries to get up, spitting blood and feeling every bone in his body protest against the trauma, but the monster is already upon him again. The masked creature moves with inhuman agility, its eyes gleaming through the mask with a bloodlust that freezes the young man's heart. Yongjin runs, his legs heavy as if moving through thick mud, while the monster pursues him with terrifying ease. The supernatural being leaps across rooftops and walls, closing in around the young man like a predator toying with its defenseless and wounded prey. It mocks Yongjin's struggle, asking why he strives so hard to live such an insignificant life full of pain and extreme loneliness. The creature delivers a blow that tears through the asphalt, missing the young man by inches and sending pieces of concrete flying like lethal projectiles through the air. Yongjin rolls on the ground, sweat mixing with rain and blood, feeling that the end Heesu prophesied is drawing ever closer. He enters a narrow alley, hoping the monster's size will prevent it from passing, but the creature merely laughs at his futile attempt to escape. The monster's shadow covers the entire alley, an absolute darkness that seems to swallow reality itself and any hope of the young man's survival. Yongjin asks himself if this is a dream, but the sharp pain in his back and the smell of death tell him it's all real. He notices unknown figures watching from the shadows, silent witnesses to his imminent slaughter by that masked and cruel executioner from the other world. The young man collapses to his knees, his strength draining away as he stares at the monster, approaching with slow, deliberate steps, savoring its victory. His face is pale, his eyes filled with tears of pure frustration and fear, a perfect portrait of human misery before the inexplicable. He screams for help, but his voice is drowned out by the thunder and torrential rain that falls mercilessly upon the city, indifferent to his fate. Yongjin gazes at the sky, feeling this is his last glimpse of the world, a bitter farewell to a life he never truly got to live. The creature raises its massive arm to deliver the final blow, its porcelain mask reflecting the cold light of the lightning bolts tearing through the black sky. But Yongjin doesn't give up, a flicker of will to live igniting his blood and giving him one last surge of pure, desperate adrenaline to fight. The monster hesitates for a second, surprised by the resistance of the human it considered weak and already defeated by fear and physical pain. The young man throws himself aside, miraculously dodging the crushing fist that obliterates the brick wall where his head had been just seconds before. He continues to flee, crawling through the filthy alley, feeling that every second gained is a victory against the death that now relentlessly pursues him. The creature calls his name, its voice a guttural distortion echoing through the alley walls, reminding him there's no place to hide. The monster claims no one will come for him, and that he should simply accept his end now, instead of prolonging his useless and pathetic suffering. Yongjin stares at the being, a flame of rebellion igniting in his gaze as he rises, determined not to die like a cornered animal. The silence of the alley is oppressive, only the young man's racing heartbeat, and the sound of rain filling the void between life and death. He runs again, but this time there's a direction to his steps, a spark of a plan, or perhaps just the instinct of a descendant. The creature pursues him with renewed fury, its claws raking concrete and walls, transforming the alley into a brutal spiritual war zone. Yongjin is cornered against a dead-end wall, the monster blocking his only escape route with its massive body and terrifying aura. He feels the creature's icy hand touch his face, a gesture of mockery before the end, as the monster laughs at his miserable, lonely plight. The monster says it will be easy for him, just as it was for Heesu, a revelation that makes Yongjin's world spin with pure horror. The creature demands his body now, the ultimate goal of this cruel hunt that began with a simple dragon nightmare and lost lineages. Yongjin feels a strange energy begin to emanate from his hands, a warmth that glows against the cold rain and the chilling touch of his aggressor. The monster's eye widens through the mask, sensing the dormant power within the young man finally awakening before the threat of total soul extinction. Light explodes between them, transforming the dark alley into an incandescent battlefield where Kwon Yongjin's fate will finally be decided by fire. He tries to plead for his life, but his voice fails before the overwhelming presence that seems to devour all oxygen from the filthy alley. The beast seizes his neck with inhuman strength, suspending him as if he were nothing more than an old disposable toy about to be destroyed. Yongjin's gaze flickers, his consciousness fading as he sees only the dark void behind the mask that laughs at his weakness. The monster revels in his suffering, emitting a guttural sound that echoes through the brick walls, a macabre celebration of its impending victory. The grip tightens, crushing the young man's trachea, and he feels the warmth of his own blood trickling down his chest, mixing with the cold rain. But, at the height of despair, Yongjin realizes something is wrong, a flicker of resistance emerging from the depths of his wounded, solitary soul. The creature roars furious that this insignificant human still dares to fight against the inevitable fate sealed by Heesu's death card. The monster raises its fist for the final blow, determined to reduce the young man to nothing more than a pile of flesh and bones. Yongjin closes his eyes, accepting that the end has come, regretting the lost chances of a life he never truly had time to enjoy. He wonders if anyone will miss him, if his absence will be noticed in this indifferent world that always treated him like a complete stranger. But darkness doesn't come. Instead, a sudden, violent heat explodes around him, slicing through the alley's silence with an ancestral power. He sees figures moving, shadows that don't belong to this plane, fighting among themselves as reality seems to bend and tear violently. A boy appears in his vision, or is it himself? Time becomes fluid, memories merging with this living, bloody nightmare. Yongjin feels the weight of destiny fall upon his shoulders, a blood inheritance he tried to ignore, but which now claims him with fury. The masked creature recoils for a second, surprised by the intervention of something it didn't expect to find in that forgotten corner of the gray city. The young man opens his eyes and sees death up close, but now there's something different in his gaze, a spark of power slowly awakening. The monster prepares to attack again, but an invisible force whips it, slamming it against the wall with an impact that cracks the solid concrete. A white paw steps into the pool of blood, firm and authoritative, carrying an aura that emanates absolute yet calming authority. It's the French bulldog, but he's no longer just a cute animal. He glows with a spiritual energy that illuminates the alley's darkness. The monster glares at the dog with hatred, recognizing a long-standing enemy, a guardian protecting the lineage it wishes to extinguish. The beast's claw lunges, but the air becomes dense, protecting Yongjin like an impenetrable shield made of pure will and golden spiritual energy. The creature howls in frustration, realizing its prey is no longer defenseless, as the bulldog's aura expands, filling the entire dark alley. Suddenly, a figure emerges from the shadows, a man with long black hair and traditional robes, wielding a blade that seems made of pure light. Yongjin watches, mesmerized, as the warrior advances with deadly elegance, each movement a precise dance of destruction against the evil that hunted him. The ancestral figure's hand extends, channeling a power that makes the ground tremble and the rain halt in the air for an eternal instant. The monster tries to escape, but it's too late. Ancestral justice has caught up, and there will be no mercy for the one who hunts the lineage's descendant. Explosions of purifying light tear through the abomination's body, transforming its hatred into ashes that vanish into the frigid wind of that dark and terrible night. A soft voice, yet laden with authority, echoes on Yongjin's mind, calling him a descendant and promising that his awakening has only just begun. He sees the warrior standing over the defeated monster's body, a vision of power and tragedy that will mark him for the rest of his days. The figure looks at him, and Yongjin feels he is being judged by generations of ancestors who have waited for this exact moment of spiritual crisis. The world begins to spin, the city lights shining again as the supernatural veil closes, leaving only emptiness and silence. Yongjin tries to stand, but his strength abandons him, the weight of everything he's seen too much for his human mind to bear now. He feels a hand on his shoulder, a warmth that comforts him before darkness finally takes him into a deep sleep. However, the rest is short and populated by dreams of dragons and ancient battles that seem more real than mundane reality itself. He sees his phone lying on the ground, its broken screen reflecting the full moon that watches the chaos with an indifference that pains his soul. The last thing he sees is the birthday message, a cruel reminder that today should have been a day of celebration, not death. Yongjin floats in a sea of uncertainties, questioning if his life will have any meaning after glimpsing the abyss hidden beneath the city. He finds himself alone in a vast field, the wind blowing secrets he still can't understand, but which already course through his veins. The image of the yellow-eyed warrior returns to Yongjin's mind, a beacon of hope and danger that will guide him through the imminent darkness. Then, the monster reappears in his dreams, a constant reminder that evil never sleeps and that the hunt has only changed form and place. Yongjin screams, but no sound comes out. He is trapped between two worlds, fighting to find his way back to the sunlight. He feels power pulsating in his hands, a vibrant energy that begs to be used to protect and to destroy what threatens his existence. The young man realizes he is no longer the same exhausted student from before. Something has changed in his core. Something ancient and terribly powerful has awakened. A long-haired woman watches him from afar, her gaze filled with sadness and expectation, as if she knows the price he will have to pay. Yongjin clenches his fists, accepting the burden placed upon him, ready to face whatever destiny has in store for his journey. His phone vibrates in the darkness, a notification lost amidst the chaos, a sign that ordinary life continues to call him desperately. Meanwhile, a stone statue watches everything with blind eyes, a symbol of immortality and stagnation that contrasts with the violent change occurring in the young man. Two men argue in the shadows, planning the next moves of a game Yongjin has barely begun to understand, but in which he is the main piece. Suddenly, the scenery abruptly shifts to the familiar and sterile environment of a school, the sun shining through the clean glass windows. Yongjin stands in the hallway, his school uniform feeling heavy and strange after what he experienced in the darkness of that rainy night. He walks mechanically, feeling the stares of the other students, wondering if they can see the mark of the supernatural he now carries with him. His classmates chat and laugh, ignorant of the danger lurking in the shadows, living their mundane lives while he bears the weight of entire worlds. Two girls comment on something trivial, and Yongjin feels a sudden urge to laugh at the irony of the situation, at the abyssal distance between them. He touches his own face, feeling his skin intact, but the memory of the pain still echoes in every nerve of his tired and tense body. The school's hubbub is deafening, a violent contrast to the deadly silence of the alley where he almost lost his soul to the creature. Seeing Heesu at the end of the hallway, his heart explodes, a mix of fear, confusion, and an inexplicable attraction that consumes him. She moves with a grace that now seems suspicious to him, each step a reminder of the sinister possession he witnessed in her. Yongjin looks away, trying to act as if nothing happened, as if they were still just two ordinary students sharing the same routine. But he knows the bond between them was forged in fire and blood, and there's no going back to innocence. A group of boys passes him, bumping his shoulder without apology, bringing him back to the petty reality of school hierarchy. He takes a deep breath, trying to control the energy vibrating beneath his skin, feeling that a single mistake could cause an unprecedented disaster there. The sunlight seems too blinding, almost artificial, as if hiding something much darker that waits for the right moment to reveal itself. Heesu stops and looks his way, and for an eternal instant, time seems to freeze again, the world around them disappearing for both. She smiles, but there's something sad in her eyes, a silent complicity that says she also remembers every detail of that night. A student with glasses watches him with curiosity, noticing Yongjin's deplorable state and the heavy aura he unconsciously emanates, awakening dangerous suspicions. Yongjin quickens his pace, wanting only to hide in the back of the classroom and pretend it was all a delusion caused by exhaustion. He sits at his desk, feeling the cold wood beneath his trembling hands, trying to focus on the teacher's words that seem to come from far away. The boy with glasses approaches, asking trivial questions, but Yongjin replies in monosyllables, his mind being elsewhere, in another time, in another fight. He looks out the window and sees the statue in the garden, and a sense of déjà vu hits him like a monstrous punch to the stomach, taking his breath away. For a second, he sees a masked figure reflected in the glass, a warning that the hunt is not over and that he will never be safe. He shakes his head, trying to shake off the vision, telling himself it's just trauma playing tricks on his fear-overwhelmed mind. The mask in his dream seems to mock his attempt at normalcy, its hollow eyes observing his every move with predatory and cruel patience. Yongjin picks up his phone and sees Heesu's messages, each one a reminder of the supernatural contract he unknowingly accepted, sealing his fate. He feels the weight of the money she transferred, a fortune that should solve his problems, but now seems only the price of his soul. The young man stares at the screen, hesitating between deleting everything or replying, feeling that any choice will lead him deeper into the spiritual abyss. The school feels like a prison now, the walls closing in on him as he desperately tries to find a way out of the madness that surrounds him. A short-haired girl calls him back to the real world, asking if he's okay, but he just nods, unable to speak. She watches him with concern, noticing that the light in his eyes has changed, becoming something deeper, darker, and much more dangerous. Around him, conversations continue, a mosaic of ordinary lives he envies with all his might, wishing he could just be Yongjin again. But he knows the call of blood is absolute, and the ancestral dragon he saw in his dreams will not let him go. His phone vibrates again, and this time it's a warning that time is running out, that the barrier between worlds is thinner than ever. The young man looks at his hands and sees the energy flowing again, a golden fire that threatens to consume everything around him if he doesn't learn to control it. He rushes to the bathroom, wanting just a moment of solitude to try and understand what is happening to his body and mind now. In the mirror's reflection, he sees the yellow-eyed warrior standing behind him, a protective and terrifying presence that accompanies his every step. The warrior says nothing, but his gaze carries the weight of centuries of battles and sacrifices, a legacy Yongjin must now bear alone. The young man splashes cold water on his face, trying to awaken from what he hopes is just a prolonged delirium caused by sleep deprivation and hunger. But the water doesn't erase the vision, and when he opens his eyes, the spiritual world is still there, superimposed on reality like an open wound. He leaves the bathroom and bumps into Heesu, who was waiting for him in the hallway with a serious, determined expression, ready to confront the naked truth. She leads him to an isolated corner where other students cannot overhear what they have to say about the dark fate they share. Heesu explains that what happened yesterday was just the beginning, that forces far greater than themselves have been set in motion by his very existence. She talks about ancestors and the need for protection, about the rituals she performs to keep monsters away from him during the day. Yongjin listens in silence, feeling a mix of gratitude and resentment for being dragged into this world of horrors without his consent. He asks why him, and she replies that his blood carries the key to something both gods and demons desire. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of the bell, calling them back to the pretense of school life, to the illusory safety of the classrooms. Heesu hands him an amulet, a small object that seems to vibrate with a calming energy, and tells him never to be separated from it. Yongjin puts it in his pocket, feeling the warmth of the object against his leg, an anchor of sanity amidst the rapidly approaching storm. He returns to the classroom but can't concentrate on anything, his eyes constantly darting to the window, watching the shadows dancing in the garden. The teacher speaks of history, of fallen heroes and empires, and Yongjin feels he is living his own story of fall and rise now. He realizes that the world is far more complex than he imagined, and that science and logic cannot explain what he has seen. The young man feels the bulldog's presence nearby, though he cannot see him, a sense that he is never truly alone, for better or worse. The day drags on, each hour feeling like an eternity of tension and anticipation as he waits for the next attack from the creatures hunting him. He sees fleeting figures in the corners of his eyes, shapes that disappear when he looks directly. reminding him that the spiritual veil is torn and bleeding there. At lunch, he isolates himself on the terrace, wanting only to breathe the fresh air and try to find some balance amidst the chaos his life has become. Heesu finds him again, bringing food, a gesture of normalcy that he accepts with a gratitude that surprises him, despite all his distrust. They eat in silence, watching the city below, a vibrant metropolis that has no idea that everyone's fate might be in their hands. Yongjin asks about the monster in the alley, and Heesu says he was just a scout, a low-level creature sent to test his defenses. She warns Tim that the next ones will be much stronger and that he needs to be ready to fight, to use the power that is awakening. The young man looks at his hands and wonders if he will ever be able to control such fury and destruction without losing himself in the process. Heesu touches his hand, a gesture of affection that makes him feel human again, a reminder that he still has something to fight for there. But the moment of peace is shattered when the statue in the courtyard below begins to move, the sound of cracking stone echoing throughout the school. Yongjin and Heesu rush to the railing, watching in horror as the stone figure transforms into a mass of green muscle and skin. It's a colossal monster, an abomination that seems to have stepped directly from the young man's deepest nightmares, now brought to life under the sunlight. Heesu's hands tremble as she searches for her amulets, realizing that the school's protection was breached much sooner than she expected. The monster roars, a sound that makes the windows vibrate and panic instantly spread among the students in the courtyard, screaming in despair. The green-skinned creature advances with terrifying speed, each step leaving a crater in the asphalt and destroying everything in its violent path. Yongjin feels fear paralyze his limbs, the sight of such brute force too much for his rational mind to process in that moment of absolute crisis. The monster looks up, its eyes fixed on the terrace where they are, recognizing Yongjin's energy and focusing all its hatred on him. Heesu screams for them to run, pulling him by the arm as the creature scales the school's walls with the agility of a hungry, relentless predator. They run through the corridors, the sound of the monster's heavy footsteps behind them a constant reminder that death is just a few meters away. Yongjin feels the amulet in his pocket burning, reacting to the presence of the abomination that now invades the sanctuary of his daily life. The creature tears through the ceiling, dust and debris falling upon them as they try to find a way out of that labyrinth of fear and destruction. They reach the gym, a large space where there's no place to hide, where they will be easy targets for the fury of that monstrous being. Heesu turns, ready to fight, her amulets glowing with a pale light against the growing darkness the monster brings with it into the school. The green-skinned monster enters the gym, its colossal stature filling the space, its heavy breathing the only audible sound in that moment of tension. Yongjin places himself in front of Heesu, a protective instinct he didn't know he had surging forth with surprising strength. The creature laughs, a guttural distortion of what should be a human sound, mocking the young man's pathetic attempt to defend his fated companion. Heesu begins to chant a ritual, her words quick and precise, trying to create a protective barrier that can contain the powerful enemy's advance. But the monster is too strong, and with a single blow it shatters Heesu's defenses, throwing her away as if she were nothing more than a leaf in the wind. Yongjin watches his only ally fall, and something within him shatters, a cold, ancient fury replacing the fear that had dominated him just seconds ago. He glares at the monster, his eyes beginning to glow with the same yellow light as the warrior from his dreams, the dragon's power awakening. The young man charges forward, no longer fleeing, but seeking confrontation, each step charged with an energy that makes the very air around him vibrate. He dodges a massive attack, moving with a speed he never imagined he possessed, feeling the power flow through every fiber of his being. The monster tries to grab him, but Yongjin strikes it with a punch charged with spiritual energy, an impact that makes the creature recoil for the first time. He tastes blood in his mouth, but it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters now is destroying the abomination that dared to harm the person who protected him. Heesu rises, wounded but determined, and joins him in battle, using her techniques to confuse and weaken the green-skinned monster. The creature roars in pain and rage, realizing it had underestimated the humans it considered easy, insignificant prey in that sports gymnasium. The battle becomes frenetic, every movement a fight for survival, every blow potentially the last for anyone caught in the chaos. Yongjin feels like he's losing control, that the power is too great for his body, but he refuses to give up as long as the monster stands. Heesu uses a purifying incense, creating a smokescreen that blinds the enemy, giving Yongjin a chance to deliver a decisive blow to the creature. The young man concentrates all his energy into his fist, feeling the dragon's heat explode into a golden light that illuminates the entire gymnasium, destroyed by the fight. He strikes the monster's chest with all his might, an impact that echoes throughout the school and finally makes the abomination crash onto the wooden floor. Silence returns to the gymnasium, only the sound of the two young people's ragged breathing, filling the void left by the fall of the colossal and terrifying enemy. Yongjin collapses to his knees, exhausted and drained of all his energy, feeling that the awakening of his power came at an immense cost to his soul. Heesu approaches, embracing him tightly, tears of relief and sadness streaming down her face, marked by the brutal battle they had just won. They look at the monster's body, which begins to transform back into stone, reverting to the statue that should never have come to life there. Heesu says they need to get out of there before others arrive, before the school authorities try to explain the unexplainable events that occurred in the gymnasium. She helps him up, and together they walk out, leaving behind the scene of destruction that will mark the end of his ordinary life. In the hallway, they see the remnants of the incense and the rosary Heesu used, symbols of a battle the world will never know took place that day. Yongjin looks at the sky and sees the sun still shining, a cruel irony in the face of the horror he will forever carry within his wounded heart. The green-skinned monster, now motionless once more, seems to watch them with a stony gaze that promises evil will soon awaken again. Heesu takes him to the infirmary, but they know that no human medicine can heal the spiritual wounds they suffered in that deadly battle. They sit in silence, processing the fact that they are now warriors in a war most people don't even believe exists. The young man feels the monster's icy hand still touching his face in his memories, a mocking gesture that will accompany him in every future nightmare. Heesu explains that they will need more allies, that Yongjin's lineage has other guardians waiting for the signal to reveal themselves. She speaks of the walnut rosary she carries, a sacred object that can purify even the deepest darkness if used with the right intention. Yongjin asks what comes next, and she replies that they need to train, need to learn to master the dragon's power before it consumes them. The young man looks at the amulet she gave him and realizes it is now his only defense against the abyss that tries to swallow him every second. They leave the school at dusk, the city lights beginning to shine again, hiding the dark secrets they now know so well. Yongjin feels the bulldog nearby again, a white shadow following him, reminding him that the ancestor is now watching his every step. He knows his journey is just beginning, and that the path ahead will be paved with dangers he can barely imagine in his exhausted mind. But, looking at Heesu, he feels he is no longer alone, and that together they can face any destiny, no matter how dark and terrible it may be. With that, Yongjin watches her every move with distrust, feeling the weight of a world he can barely comprehend or accept. Heesu explains that he bears dangerous marks, and that, without that seal, darkness will find him again even before nightfall. She holds a colorful bracelet and gazes into his eyes with an almost suffocating intensity, making it clear there's no turning back now. Yongjin questions the sanity of it all, but her silence is the most disturbing answer he could receive in that fateful moment. Heesu insists that he must not remove that amulet for anything, for it is the only thing keeping his soul anchored. The atmosphere between them is dense, a mix of unspoken secrets and the imminence of a disaster neither of them can prevent. Yongjin sighs, weariness weighing on his shoulders as if he carried the entire world, as he tries to process the madness of his new reality. Heesu averts her gaze, hiding her own anguish, knowing that his awakening has attracted eyes that should never have opened to this plane. They walk in silence around the school, every shadow seeming like a lurking monster, ready to deliver the final strike to their lives. The girl warns that they need to talk seriously after classes, but Yongjin shakes his head, wanting only for that day to end. However, fate doesn't care for human wishes, and Heesu knows that what began in the gymnasium was only the prelude. Yongjin stares at her one last time, his eyes reflecting the emptiness of one who has lost peace forever, and follows his own solitary path. The sun begins to set, painting the city a bloody orange, as a blue pickup truck crosses the alley, oblivious to the supernatural chaos. Walking alone, the young man feels the weight of his backpack and the tightness of the amulet on his wrist, feeling like a stranger in his own routine. He pauses for a moment, observing the sky, trying to convince himself that everything he saw was nothing but a delusion. The mark on his wrist burns faintly, reminding him of the statue's icy touch and Lee Heesu's penetrating gaze. In a fit of denial, he tears off the colorful object and throws it into the trash, determined to ignore the girl's dark warnings. As he opens his bedroom door, Yongjin's heart pounds. There, sitting calmly on his bed, is the white French bulldog. He recoils, letting out a stifled cry as the small dog stares at him with an intelligence no ordinary animal should ever possess. Panic seizes his senses, and he wonders if madness has finally caught up to him, definitively, within his own home. At this, the bulldog lets out an audible sigh, watching the young man with a disdain that seems to stem from centuries of ancestral wisdom and arrogance. Yongjin is frozen against the wall as the animal descends from the bed with supernatural elegance, walking towards him without any rush. The silence is broken when the dog utters a short sentence, demanding to know if the young man intends to stand there all day. Then, a trembling hand appears, holding a plate of sausages, a desperate attempt by Yongjin to deal with the bizarre and inexplicable situation. The bulldog sniffs the food with disdain, making it clear he expected something far more befitting his position as a primal protector. Yongjin watches the animal eat, his mind reeling as he tries to find a logical explanation for a dog that talks and demands respect. Exhausted, he collapses onto the bed, feeling his energy completely drained, while the white dog remains vigilant by his side. The bulldog comments that the young man looks like a walking corpse, and that his lineage deserved a descendant with a bit more backbone. Yongjin ignores the insult, closing his eyes in the hope that, upon waking, the dog will have vanished like smoke in a nightmare. But the animal's presence is far too real, the sound of its breathing filling the small room and bringing a suffocating tension. The young man sits up abruptly, grabbing his phone to check for any message from Heesu, anything that might make sense of this madness. Meanwhile, the bulldog settles on the floor, observing Yongjin's every move with its dark eyes, filled with hidden ancestral secrets. Yongjin feels cold sweat trickling down his neck, realizing that his ordinary life has been shattered and replaced by a dark and dangerous fantasy. He scrolls through apps trying to find some sign of normalcy, but news of strange incidents across the city begins to pop up on his screen. His hands tremble as he reads about the damage to the school gymnasium, realizing the world hasn't forgotten what happened inside. The white dog warns him to stop looking for answers in useless devices and start listening to what his own blood is screaming. Yongjin stands up, feeling a sudden rage swell in his chest. He didn't ask for any of this. Not the monsters, not the dog. He shouts that he wants his life back, but the bulldog merely yawns, stating that destiny doesn't accept returns from cowards. The dog's gaze turns icy, a silent warning that ancestral patience is wearing thin in the face of such childish rebellion. The young man in the white shirt stares at the small animal, feeling a strange and powerful connection that frightens him more than any creature. In a sudden move, he tries to grab the dog, but the bulldog dodges with an agility that defies the laws of physics. Yongjin stumbles and falls, while the animal watches him from atop a chair, silently laughing at its host's lack of coordination. Frustration burns in the young man's veins, and he begins to throw objects at the animal, trying to ward off that constant, irritating presence. But nothing hits the bulldog, who seems enveloped in an invisible aura of protection that repels any attempt at mundane physical aggression. The dog then sits and says that if he doesn't believe the word of an ancestor, perhaps he needs more palpable proof. Yongjin stops, panting, watching the animal walk to the corner of the room where a drawer seems to vibrate with a dark energy. He hesitates, sensing that what he is about to see will change his perception of the previous night definitively and cruelly. The bulldog orders him to open the drawer and face the truth his cowardly mind tried to erase to protect itself from the horror. Voices whisper in the shadows of the room, echoes of past battles that Yongjin begins to hear as if they are happening inside his head. Upon touching the drawer handle, an electric shock courses through his body, and memories of the dark alley begin to return as flashes. He pulls open the drawer and lets out a gasp of horror at what is hidden there, beneath his ordinary school clothes. There lies the bloody piece of cloth, the torn fabric of the shirt he wore when the masked creature nearly finished him off. Yongjin holds the fabric with trembling hands, the metallic scent of fresh blood still clinging to the fibers, proving that nothing was a dream. Distant screams seem to echo from the hallway outside, but he is too focused on the physical evidence of his own almost certain death. The images return with full force, the creature leaping over him, claws tearing through the air, and the brutal impact against the cold asphalt. He feels the scar on his body throb, the invisible mark the ancestor left when saving his soul at the very last possible second. The young man falls to his knees, the weight of the truth finally crushing his resistance, as tears of shock begin to blur his vision. The bulldog approaches and, with its paw on Yongjin's knee, carves out the words, "Now you know the price of the life you carry." Yongjin questions, his voice choked. Why me? Why was someone so ordinary and weak chosen to bear such a heavy and deadly burden? The animal, with ancestral wisdom, replies that blood does not choose the strong. It merely flows wherever it finds a path to continue existing. The young man stares at the soiled cloth in his hands, and the realization, cold and heavy, finally dawns. From that moment on, he is a marked target for all the shadows of the city. With this, the room seems smaller, more oppressive, and the harsh truth settles in. His home is no longer the safe haven he naively imagined. The bulldog, impatient with lamentation, warns that the time for doubt is over, for the protective barrier it created is starting to weaken, corroded by the young man's disbelief. He explains that every fragment of Yongjin's doubt acts as a deep crack in the spiritual shield, protecting that building from monster detection. Yongjin tries to stand, seeking to regain control of his own mind, but the bulldog continues to dictate the rules, with an authority that brooks no questions. The young man, with no other option, asks what he should do now, and the dog's answer is simple and direct: accept who he truly is within. The animal then reveals an ancient secret. It is the manifestation of an ancestor who swore to protect the lineage until the rightful heir fully awakened. Yongjin gazes into the mirror, seeing only an exhausted student, but the bulldog, with its keen sight, perceives the potential of a slumbering dragon beneath that human skin. The dog's silhouette projects onto the wall, becoming something imposing and mystical, as Yongjin feels an overwhelming spiritual pressure around him, almost suffocating. The young man tries to breathe, but the air feels dense as water, filled with the pure ancient presence of the entity inhabiting the dog. The bulldog, now shadowy and formidable, whispers that time is running out and he needs to decide whether to fight or become just another devoured soul. The room light flickers, and for a second, Yongjin sees the ancestor's true face, a warrior with yellow eyes and infinite power that rips through the veil of reality. The impact of this vision leaves him breathless, his eyes wide as he tries to reconcile the image of the dog with that of a primordial god. The animal, as if nothing happened, returns to normal, wagging its tail with cruel irony, asking if the young man now believes in the divinity before him. Yongjin murmurs that it's impossible, that his family never had anything special, just a life of poverty and hard work, devoid of any mysticism. With that, the bulldog gets annoyed and jumps on him, knocking him to the floor to show that its physical strength is real, not just an illusion. The dog growls, revealing that Yongjin's parents knew everything and sacrificed a lot so he could grow up far from this dangerous supernatural world. The young man is in shock. His parents, the people he thought he knew, were part of this cosmic and dangerous conspiracy all along. The bulldog confirms that his inheritance was hidden out of love, but now the veil has been torn, and there's no more protection, only harsh reality. Yongjin feels a wave of betrayal mixed with fear, realizing that his entire existence was built on lies and carefully guarded secrets. The animal explains, with a voice full of urgency, that Yongjin is the only one left of the lineage, and that it will die if he doesn't learn to use Jin. Jin, the energy of life, the fire that purifies evil spirits, now courses through Yongjin's veins like hot lava, burning every cell. They remain silent for a long time, the weight of this revelation changing the atmosphere between human and spirit forever, sealing a new pact. Yongjin looks at his own hands, trying to feel the energy the ancestor speaks of, but finds only the tremor of dread, a chill down his spine. The bulldog warns that the first lesson will be survival, for he is not the only one who felt the heir's awakening that night. The young man asks who else knows, and the dog replies with a somber look, indicating that darkness has many hungry eyes, always lurking. With that, Yongjin feels a shiver run down his spine, a sense of being watched by something beyond the cramped four walls of his room. The bulldog orders him to prepare, for the first trial of his lineage is knocking at the door, and it will not come with words, but with claws. The young man rushes to the window, looking at the deserted street, feeling that the night's calm is merely a mask for the impending horror. The ancestor, with a grave voice, reveals that the monster they faced at school was not destroyed, only temporarily banished by the young man's incomplete flames. Then, a sound of heavy footsteps echoes in the outer hallway, making Yongjin grip the doorknob with desperate, useless strength. The white dog growls, its fur bristling as it assumes a combat stance, ready to defend its descendant once more, with its life if necessary. Yongjin pleads for it to stop, for him to go back to being just a poor futureless student in Seoul, a nobody without responsibilities. But the bulldog says, with an unforgiving voice, that he is now a king without a throne, hunted by monsters who wish to devour his divine and primordial essence. The room door creaks, the spiritual pressure from outside increasing until it becomes almost unbearable for the young man's human senses, crushing him. They brace for impact, the air around the bulldog beginning to glow with an intense white light that blinds Yongjin for an instant. The young man closes his eyes and prays that the ancestors' strength will be enough to keep them alive for one more bloody, cruel night. When he opens his eyes, he sees that the bulldog stares at him with mortal expectation. He needs to fight alongside it, or both will fall, their fate sealed. The dog lets out a bark that sounds like thunder, breaking the silence and challenging anything that dares to enter that sacred, protected territory. Suddenly, Yongjin's gaze turns to the main door, feeling that the danger is not just a whisper but a physical and palpable reality. The white dog runs into the hallway, barking furiously at something the shadows insist on hiding from the poor young man's limited vision, something terrible. Yongjin follows, his heart pounding in his throat, feeling that each step takes him further from the life he knew, towards an abyss. He stops in the middle of the room, the darkness seeming to come alive, twisting as if trying to devour the remaining light of his hope. The bulldog jumps onto a piece of furniture, its eyes fixed on the entrance, where the wooden structure begins to crack under a colossal and relentless force. With that, the door trembles violently, the sound of claws scratching metal making Yongjin let out a cry of pure, absolute terror. Outside, the presence is suffocating, a mass of negative energy that seems to suck all the oxygen from the humble little apartment. The young man recoils, stumbling over his own feet as the white dog places itself between him and the imminent threat roaring outside. The ancestor places its paw on the ground and a small shock wave pushes back the shadows, creating a temporary circle of safety for the young man, a brief truce. Yongjin stares at the door, his eyes wide as he watches the doorknob slowly turn, as if the intruder is savoring his fear, a predator. Through the frosted glass, a gigantic silhouette is revealed. It's the gym statue, the green-skinned monster they thought they'd defeated. The creature's neck cracks loudly, a sound of stone-grinding flesh, as it observes its prey through the fragile glass barrier. Yongjin stammers that it's impossible, that it shouldn't know where he lives, but the bulldog knows that blood is the perfect tracker, the key. The young man realizes, with a chill, that the monster hasn't stopped following him since he left school, moving through the city's shadows like an invisible predator. The ancestor explains that this is not just a monster, but a wandering spirit that found a stone host to manifest and cause terror. The creature punches the door with a force that makes the walls crack, dust falling from the ceiling onto Yongjin's pale, sweaty face, an image of despair. The bulldog says that spirits are part of nature, but this one has been corrupted by hatred and an insatiable hunger for ancestral souls. Various items fly off the shelves as the pressure mounts, transforming the apartment into a scene of total and desolate destruction. The monster roars, a sound that doesn't belong to this world, vibrating in Yongjin's bones and paralyzing his muscles with a deep, ancient fear. Through the breach in the door, the creature's gaze meets his, a black void filled with an uncontrollable, millennia-old bloodlust. The white dog warns that the door won't withstand another blow and that they need to act now or they'll die buried in the rubble with no chance. Just then, the wood explodes into 1,000 pieces as the statue's colossal fist smashes through the entrance, aiming for the terrified boy's neck. Yongjin screams and throws himself back, feeling the wind from the impact graze his face, almost tearing off his skin in the process, a breath of death. The monster enters, its gigantic stature forcing it to stoop under the low ceiling, each movement destroying what little remained of the home. It advances with deliberate slowness, each step making the floor tremble and Yongjin's ears buzz with the frequency of death. The boy tries to find something to defend himself, but his hands find only emptiness, his mind unable to summon the power of Jin, paralyzed. The bulldog, fearless, jumps in front of the creature, its eyes glowing with a divine light, challenging the stone giant to take another step. The statue laughs, a guttural, dry sound, and hurls a piece of the wall at the animal, which dodges with a graceful, mystical pirouette. Yongjin watches the unequal struggle, feeling his own uselessness corrode his chest. as his protector sacrifices himself for a descendant who won't fight. The white dog screams at him to run, to get out of there and find Heesu, because she's the only one who can help him awaken now. The animal unleashes a beam of light that temporarily blinds the monster, creating a precious opening for the young heir's desperate escape. Yongjin runs into the corridor, tears streaming down his face, feeling like the worst coward for leaving his ancestor behind in that deadly battle. But the bulldog quickly catches up, running beside him as the statue obliterates what was left of the apartment in blind, devastating fury. The dog warns that the monster is now hunting his scent and that running through open streets is planned, certain suicide, a trap. The creature's roar echoes through the building, causing neighbors to start opening their doors, only to recoil from the absolute horror revealed. The bulldog jumps onto Yongjin's shoulder, ordering him to change direction and enter the alleys where their agility will be a crucial advantage. The monster appears at the end of the corridor, its stone skin gleaming under the fluorescent light, moving with a speed that defies its colossal size. It hurls a fire extinguisher that explodes against the wall beside Yongjin's head, covering everything in blinding white powder. The white dog uses this distraction to guide the boy down the emergency stairs, descending the steps in leaps that seem like short, almost effortless flights through the air. They reach the street, the cold night air hitting Yongjin's face, who runs as if his life depends on every heartbeat, every breath. The bulldog warns that the creature is right behind them and that it won't stop until it has the dragon's heart in its stone hands, forever. Yongjin asks why it wants him so much, and the dog replies that he is the fuel the spirit needs to become immortal, a sacrifice. The chase continues through the dark alleys, the sound of the statue's heavy footsteps crushing the asphalt right behind them in a constant, terrifying rhythm. The white dog suddenly stops, sensing a drastic change in the monster's energy, and warns Yongjin to prepare for something very, very strange. The statue emerges from the shadows, but it doesn't attack immediately. Instead, it stops and observes Yongjin's coat, which is caught in its colossal hands. The boy watches, confused as the monster begins to put on the coat, tearing the fabric with its colossal muscles and rough stone skin, a grotesque image. The bulldog murmurs that the creature is trying to absorb the boy's identity through his belongings, a dark and disturbing ritual of spiritual mimicry. The monster now wears what's left of the school coat, a grotesque and absurd image that chills Yongjin's blood with pure metaphysical dread. It positions itself like an athlete, mimicking the starting stance of a 100-meter dash, its eyes fixed on the back of its helpless prey's neck. The spirit inside the statue lets out a twisted laugh, finding it amusing to hunt the air in a game of cat and mouse through the city streets. Yongjin feels his sanity slipping away, seeing a stone monster wearing his clothes and preparing to race against him in the cold night. With that, the creature rockets forward, with a force that explodes the ground beneath its feet, covering the distance between them in a terrified blink. The bulldog leaps to intercept the attack, but is thrown far by a shoulder blow that feels like the impact of a high-speed truck. Yongjin falls, seeing the monster approach for the final blow, its stone claws ready to tear his chest and steal his dragon essence. He closes his eyes, expecting the end, but a familiar sound of music and spiritual energy cuts through the air, paralyzing the creature in place. A flash of orange light appears at the end of the alley, and an imposing figure emerges from the shadows and dust of the bloody urban battle. Yongjin opens his eyes and can't believe what he sees. The glow of the soul is emanating from someone he knew in a very different yet familiar way. He whispers her name as the energy around the girl begins to form ancient and powerful symbols of divine and ancestral protection. The bulldog gets up, panting, and lets out a sigh of relief, realizing that the much-needed reinforcement has finally arrived to fight. Heesu is there, holding a mystical device that amplifies her spiritual power, her gaze fixed on the monster with cold, calculated fury. Yongjin stares at her, shocked by his classmate's transformation into an elite warrior capable of facing gods and monsters without hesitation. Heesu screams his name, ordering him to get up and prepare his own jin because the true battle for survival has just begun. The sounds of Buddhist mantras echoes from the cell phone, a spiritual barrier that vibrates against the darkness, trying to swallow the alley, dissipating it. Suddenly, the air explodes in purifying flames, transforming the scene into an inferno of light and shadows distorted by hidden power. Heesu observes the ancestral bulldog and Yongjin, her eyes carrying forbidden knowledge that surpasses any logic of a common student. The boy feels the heat of the flames lick his face, but the fire doesn't burn him. It consumes only the malice around, purifying the air. The flaming figure roars, an entity of pure hatred that refuses to be banished back into the spiritual abyss from which it came. Yongjin is paralyzed, accumulated exhaustion, and the shock of seeing his classmate as a mystic warrior freezing him in place. He gasps for air, but the scent of ozone and burnt incense invades his lungs, a stark reminder that this isn't a dream, but reality itself. The little white bulldog lets out a growl of approval, sensing that the aid that has arrived is far more powerful than they ever anticipated. The trio positions themselves as the energy fluctuates, creating an electric tension that raises the hairs on Yongjin's arms, an ominous premonition. Flames erupt from the ground as if the asphalt itself is bleeding fire, marking the territory of a battle mortals will never witness. The fire creature writhes, morphing into an increasingly grotesque and menacing form under the night's orange glow, thirsty for souls. The spiritual monster's head explodes in sparks, yet it continues to advance, driven by a will that ignores physical pain, a pure fury. Heesu doesn't retreat an inch, focused on keeping the ritual active as she holds the mystic device in her firm, determined hands. She stomps down fiercely, sealing the protection circle as the monster prepares for an attack that could pulverize bones, a deadly blow. Just then, the impact strikes, a shockwave that sends dust flying and makes building windows vibrate with sheer power. The ground shatters under the creature's weight, but Yongjin barely dodges, feeling the vacuum of the blow pass terrifyingly close. He and Heesu roll across the ground, trying to distance themselves from the rock-skinned beast now emerging from the purifying flames, stronger than before. The girl grabs Yongjin's arm, pulling him up with a strength he never knew she possessed, utterly surprising him. The boy groans in pain, his body screaming for rest, but he knows that stopping Sing now means certain death for them both, without mercy. Heesu shouts instructions, warning him that the spirit is in its most aggressive form and won't stop until it consumes their essence forever. The colorful-eyed phantom hovers over them like an executioner, ready to deliver the mercy blow under the ominous moon. The fall is inevitable, and Yongjin feels the cold asphalt against his back as the monster leaps to crush his chest without mercy. Up close, the creature's face is a mask of stone and fury, with eyes that glow with a predatory, insane red light. The rockskin monster raises its massive fists, blocking the moonlight and casting a shadow of death over the boy, an ominous foreboding. It strikes the ground, missing Yongjin's head by mere millimeters, carving a crater where the heir of the lineage had just been. Heesu hurls an amulet, trying to distract the beast, while Yongjin desperately scrambles away from the reach of those stone hands, searching for an escape. The creature roars again, a sound that doesn't seem to come from vocal cords, but from the grinding of mountains tearing apart, lacerating the very air. It turns to the girl, recognizing her as the immediate threat, and advances with the terrifying speed of an elite predator, ravenous. Heesu tries to dodge, but the monster is too fast, forcing her to use every ounce of her agility to avoid being caught by the neck and annihilated. Yongjin watches it all helpless, feeling rage and frustration boil in his chest at being nothing but dead weight, a useless burden. He clenches his teeth, and for a moment, a spark of something ancient and powerful glimmers deep within his dilated pupils, a clear sign. Meanwhile, in the surrounding areas, the mundane world remains oblivious to the horror unfolding amidst the shadows of residential buildings, utterly unconscious. Heesu begs Yongjin to run, but the boy refuses to leave her to face that demon alone in the city's darkness, a firm decision. She insists, tears of exertion mixing with the dirt on her face, proving that her power has a physical limit, that she is ultimately human. Yongjin stands, legs trembling, but his gaze is now fixed on the enemy, ignoring the fear that once paralyzed him completely, utterly transformed. The stone monster halts, sensing the shift in Yongjin's energy, and tilts its head as if analyzing a new prey, a fresh challenge. The boy takes a deep breath, and time seems to slow as he tries to access that power the bulldog mentioned so many times before the Jinn. Every beat of his heart echoes like a war drum, resonating with the blood of ancestors who mastered the supernatural centuries ago. He feels an unbearable pressure in his chest as if a dam is about to burst within his own tired and wounded soul. Heesu senses the change and steps back, making space for what is about to unfold in the center of that bloody alley, a true spectacle. She knows that the awakening of an heir is a violent process, a birth that demands blood, sweat, and an unyielding, pure will. The monster lunges for the final blow, but Yongjin doesn't move, waiting for the exact moment when death draws near, a daring challenge. His eyes close for a split second, and he plunges into a darkness where only the bulldog's voice echoes, a guiding light. The creature is upon him, rock-hard claws ready to tear his flesh and steal what remains of his life, his very essence. But then the impossible happens. A flash of golden light explodes from Yongjin, repelling the monster with monumental impact force, a true rebirth. The ancestor's spirit, manifested with bare ears in an ethereal form, observes the awakening with a smile of pure arrogance and satisfaction. The shock throws Heesu and the creature to opposite sides, as the center of the alley becomes the eye of a spiritual hurricane, devastating all. Yongjin opens his eyes, and they are no longer the eyes of an exhausted student. They glow with the primordial, overwhelming fury of a god. The rock-skinned monster tries to rise, but the aura emanating from the boy is so heavy that gravity seems to triple, utterly crushing it. He looks at his own hands, seeing the traces of Jin energy dance between his fingers like pure golden lightning and uncontrollable fury. The boy feels he could crush the world, but the pain of wielding such power begins to crack his already fragile sanity. A true torture. All around, reality seems to unravel, colors blending into a whirlwind of gray and gold under his command, absolute chaos. He walks towards the beast, each step leaving a burned mark on the asphalt, a chilling warning that the game has now changed forever. The young heir of the Kwon lineage takes his stance, and the atmosphere of absolute terror gives way to an almost religious reverence for his power. He whispers words he doesn't recognize, an ancient language flowing from his lips as if he had always known it, innate. The spiritual world watches, ancestral entities curious to see if this heir will be the savior or the ultimate destruction of the lineage, his destiny. Yongjin points the creature, and the air around him begins to swirl, forming invisible blades that cut through reality itself, a strike. Before him, the stone giant suddenly seems minuscule, a mere insect before the majesty that has just awakened within the air, insignificant. He no longer feels weariness, only an insatiable hunger to purify the darkness that dared to threaten his life and Heesu's, a vengeance. At that, the scenery completely distorts, and Yongjin finds himself transported to a plane where time and space no longer exist, a dimension. A man dressed in black, wielding swords that exhale silent death, appears before him in the mists of his feverish mind, a specter. It is the primordial ancestor, the source of every burden he carries, gazing at him with eyes that have seen millennia of war, of pain. The young man in the white shirt stares at the eternal warrior, feeling the weight of the inheritance he tried to deny with all his limited strength. The dialogue between them is silent, an exchange of wills where the heir must prove himself worthy of wielding the energy of the gods, immortal. Yongjin demands to know why he was chosen, why his simple life was ruined by monsters and talking dogs with superiority complexes, with rage. The warrior merely smiles, a chilling gesture indicating that destiny cares not for the desires of those it drags along powerless. The bulldog's image superimposes itself over the warrior's face, a reminder that the mentor is always present, observing every flaw and every triumph, loyal. The heir understands there is no escape, only the path forward through the blood and power that now surges through his veins untamed. His feet plant firmly on the ground of this spiritual plane, his white student boots contrasting with the sacred soil of his ancestors, imposing. The warrior and the youth stand face to face, an image of past and future colliding in a single moment of extreme revelation, a portal. They touch hands, and an electrical discharge courses through Yongjin's being, burning away every doubt that still lingered in his heart, purifying him. He accepts the burden, accepts the pain, and accepts the responsibility of being the shield between the world of men and that of monsters. A protector. The warrior unsheathes his blades, and the light they emanate is so brilliant it blinds any attempt at external observation in the alley, a miracle. Spiritual energy condenses, taking the form of a blade of light that Yongjin grips with a confidence bordering on madness, a power. He strikes the void, and the cut manifests in the real world, tearing through the asphalt and splitting the stone monster into two pieces, a cry of victory. Fragments of rock fly everywhere as Yongjin stomps down, sealing the end of that grotesque and violent manifestation, and of fear. The giant collapses in an explosion of twisted metal and dust that covers the entire block, taking the car it held with it. Heesu lies fallen, wounded and breathless, watching the destruction with a mixture of relief and dread at the power her friend unleashed. Yongjin also bleeds, for the price of using Jin without training is instantly exacted from his fragile muscles and bones. He looks at the back of the defeated creature, seeing its spirit dissipate like smoke in the night wind that finally begins to cool. But the danger isn't over. The monster attempts one last lunge, driven by a remnant of hatred that refuses to die on the asphalt. The young man can barely stand, his vision dimming as the energy flow violently abandons his body. Just then, a new monstrous creature emerges from the shadows, drawn by the feast of spiritual energy that has just been served in the alley. Heesu tries to get up, but her legs won't obey, forcing her to watch the new horror approaching the wounded Yongjin. The young heir looks at the beast with tired contempt, preparing to fight until his last breath. The creature lets out a sharp shriek, its red eyes fixed on the exposed throat of the young man who now seems so vulnerable. Lee Heesu cries out a warning, but her voice fails, terror silencing any attempt at help as the monster leaps to attack. Yongjin braces for impact, but something white flashes across his vision with a speed he can barely follow. It's the bulldog, leaping with unexpected ferocity, sinking its teeth into the creature's leg and halting its deadly advance. The white dog fights like a lion, proving that its small physical form is just a disguise for an immortal warrior spirit. Yongjin seizes the opening, gathering the last crumbs of energy remaining in his nearly empty and aching spiritual core. He stares at the monster and, for an instant, the image of the primordial ancestor superimposes itself onto his own, intimidating the beast of pure hatred. The young man delivers a punch charged with Jin, the impact creating a shockwave that hurls the creature against the brick wall. He doesn't stop, advancing with blind determination, punching the beast until the sound of breaking bones fills the alley's silence. The monster tries to retaliate, its claws raking Yongjin's chest, but the young man ignores the pain as if it were just a distant memory. He grips the creature's hand, breaking its fingers with a coldness that shocks even the bulldog, who watches the scene with respect. The white dog retreats, seeing that its pupil has finally crossed the line between victim and hunter in the supernatural world. He gives the final command, ordering Yongjin to use the forbidden technique to seal that portal once and for all before others arrive. The young man understands what he must do, though he knows the cost will be greater than anything he has ever paid in his life. The monster roars in agony as Yongjin concentrates his entire existence into a single point of light between his palms. Then, the alley is flooded by an absolute white glow, a beacon of purity that erases darkness and disintegrates malice on a molecular level. The bulldog closes its eyes, feeling the vibration of the power flowing from its descendant, a power now recognized by heavens and earth. When the light fades, Yongjin stands alone in the center of the alley, the creature reduced to ashes that the wind blows away. His hand trembles, but he feels a new connection to the world, a sharpened perception that warns him of every danger hidden in the shadows. He turns to Heesu, who looks at him as if seeing a stranger, a being who transcended common humanity on that bloody night. His face is stained with blood and sweat, a war mask that will never be forgotten by those who witnessed the heir's awakening. Heesu tries to say something, but the ensuing silence is deeper than any words, a mutual acknowledgement of the horror they now share. Yongjin looks at the bulldog, who now returns to his arrogant posture, acting as if everything that happened was just a basic lesson. His hands still burn, the vestiges of the Jin leaving invisible scars that will forever mark his soul as the chosen one of the bloodline. The trio remains there for a moment, surrounded by the debris of a battle that the world will never know happened in its own backyard. A residual power effect floats in the air, small sparks of light that disappear as the sun begins to threaten to rise on the distant horizon. With that, a sequence of visions invades Yongjin's mind, showing the consequences of his actions on the fabric of urban spiritual reality. He sees portals closing, entities retreating into the abysses, and balance being restored, at least for now, in that part of the city. The images flash like lightning, revealing that the war is much larger than he imagined, extending to every corner of the country. He sees other heirs, other battles, and the suffering of those who couldn't awaken their power in time to save themselves from the horror. The responsibility weighs on his shoulders like a mountain, and he understands that his life as an ordinary student died in that dark alley. Every monster he saw, every cry of spiritual agony is now part of his collective memory as Kwon's heir. The bulldog snorts, sensing Yongjin's emotional burden, and reminds him that regret is a luxury warriors can no longer afford. They need to move, to disappear before human authorities arrive to investigate the inexplicable damage to the building and the asphalt. Heesu rises with difficulty, wiping blood from her lip and assuming her exemplary student posture as if nothing had happened. The mask of normalcy is the most important tool they have to survive in a society that fears what it cannot comprehend. Yongjin tries to do the same, but his body is in tatters, each movement an agony that reminds him of his brutal new reality. They walk through the empty streets of dawn, three displaced figures in a world that sleeps peacefully while the supernatural hunts them. The boy looks at the sky, seeing the first morning lights, and wonders if he will ever have a peaceful night's sleep again. The shadows in the alleys seem deeper now, each dark corner a possible hiding place for the next beast that will come to test him. The bulldog walks ahead, his tail wagging slightly, a rare sign of satisfaction with the performance of his reluctant and tired pupil. Heesu walks beside Yongjin, her presence being the only comfort in a world that has suddenly become too strange and dangerous. Upon reaching a safe place, where the spiritual energy is stable and Heesu's protections are strong enough to keep them hidden, the boy collapses on a sofa, feeling the weight of the world finally taking its toll, his mind floating between consciousness and sleep. He dreams of dragons and gods, of flames that devour cities, and of a man with yellow eyes who calls him Hair. The voice is hypnotic, promising infinite power if he only fully surrenders to the bloodline and forgets his weak, limited humanity. Yongjin fights the call, clinging to memories of his mother, of his simple life, and even of his annoying school math classes. He knows that if he loses his connection to the human world, he will become just another monster on the ancestral chessboard. His alarm clock rings in his mind, forcing him back to the reality of his room, where the bulldog stares at him with his usual expression of boredom. The day has begun, and with it, the challenges of keeping up appearances while his ribs throb with every deep breath he tries to take. He looks at himself in the mirror, seeing the cuts and bruises, and invents a mental excuse about having fallen down the stairs to tell his classmates. Heesu has already left, leaving only a note with instructions on how to care for his spiritual wounds using incense and meditation. The bulldog demands food, reminding him that even spiritual guardians need physical sustenance to maintain their manifested forms in the world. Yongjin sighs, opening a can of cheap dog food, feeling his dignity being devoured along with that meal. He dresses for school, his uniform hiding the marks of battle, but nothing can hide the change in his now sharp gaze. Leaving the house, he feels that the world is different, sharper, more dangerous, and infinitely more complicated than he ever imagined. On the way, Yongjin observes the pedestrians, wondering how many of them also carry dark secrets under their impeccable office clothes. He feels a pang of loneliness, knowing that he is now part of an exclusive club where the price of entry was his peace of mind. Passing through the square, he sees the green-skinned spirit he faced before, now in a peaceful, almost human form, observing the flowers. It's a surreal sight, the beast that tried to kill him now looking like just a melancholic citizen, seeking a moment of tranquility. The creature senses his presence and bows its head in a gesture of respect, acknowledging the warrior who defeated it the previous night. Yongjin watches the crowd pass around the entity, photographers and runners completely ignoring the monster's presence among them in broad daylight. The spirit holds an imaginary medal, a vestige of its past life as an athlete that still defines its existence after physical death. A woman passes and smells at nothing, and for a moment, the green-skinned creature seems to glow with an almost divine and pure light. She sits on a bench, and the monster remains by her side, like a silent guardian of memories that time could not erase. Two children run nearby, laughing, and the spirit watches them with a sadness that unexpectedly grips Yongjin's heart. The boy asks the bulldog why the creatures act this way, why they alternate between murderous fury and this contemplative, sad calm. The black-haired girl, Heesu, suddenly appears, explaining that spirits are slaves to their own obsessions and the rules that created them. She walks beside them, revealing that the athlete died seeking perfection and is now condemned to repeat his routine forever. The bulldog confirms, explaining that the monster's fury in the alley was caused by the violation of its training territory during the dark night. Colorful spirits float around the square, small manifestations of human desires and fears that feed the spiritual ecosystem of the big city. Yongjin understands that not everything is black and white, that monsters are also victims of their own broken souls and unfulfilled desires. Heesu says their job isn't just to destroy, but also to understand and, when possible, give rest to these tormented souls. The young man looks at his hand, feeling the warmth of the Jin pulsing softly, a tool of destruction that can also be a key to liberation. He accepts that his journey is only beginning, and that each monster faced will be a lesson about the very nature of the human and divine soul. The bulldog snorts one last time, warning that the next challenge is already on its way, and this time, Yongjin will need much more than just luck to survive what comes from the shadows. Heesu observes the scene in silence, her bandages on her face the only visual testament to the horror they faced in the dark alley. She clenches her hands, feeling the weight of secrets that can no longer be kept, as the air in the room thickens. Suddenly, Heesu bows in a gesture of profound gratitude that shocks both the young man and the canine mentor, breaking the ice in the room. Yongjin is paralyzed, his face expressing pure shock, trying to understand why this girl is acting so submissively and respectfully. Her gaze is deep, laden with a melancholy that suggests she has seen things no ordinary person should be able to bear. The bulldog cocks his head, realizing that the girl's connection to the spiritual world is much stronger than he initially imagined. At this, a strange energy begins to flow, memories of ancient talismans and rituals that seem to float around Heesu's fragile figure. Heavy footsteps echo on an invisible plane, symbolizing the weight of destiny that now rests on the shoulders of these two marked young students. Heesu's vision sharpens, revealing that she not only sees the dog, but understands the royal lineage it represents. An intense glow emanates from a distant object, as if reality itself were trying to warn Yongjin about the approaching danger. The sound of breaking glass resonates in his mind, a metaphor for his peaceful life shattered without any chance of repair. Flowers of magical light seem to sprout where the Jin touched the ground, a trace of power that attracts curious and hungry entities from the shadows. Shadows of children run in a distant past, a scene overflowing with an innocence that Heesu lost long ago. The image of a colossal knife cuts through his vision, reminding Yongjin that the power he received is meant to destroy and purify. The young man in the white shirt questions Heesu about how she knows all this, while the bulldog observes every detail of her reaction. The canine asks a direct question, challenging the girl to reveal her true identity before any trust can be established. She lowers her gaze, admitting that she is not actually a shaman, but something that carries a much heavier and darker burden. Yongjin tries to process the information, but his exhausted mind struggles to stay focused as the bulldog demands clear, direct answers. He reveals she is the daughter of a shaman, someone born in the center of rituals and possessions that shaped her distorted understanding of the world. She explains that her mother was powerful, capable of invoking entities like Songakshi with an ease that bordered on insanity and danger. The conversation deepens, and Heesu confesses that if she were to return home now, she would be forced to serve as a channel for evil. The bulldog listens carefully, realizing that the girl is from something much bigger than a simple out-of-control alley spirit. Behind Yongjin, the silhouette of the long-haired spirit silently manifests, observing the dialogue like a guardian awaiting its own hour. Heesu notices the primordial entity's presence and shivers, recognizing the overwhelming power emanating from the ancestor who protects the young man in front of her. Yongjin feels like a complete idiot, realizing that while he tried to ignore everything, the spiritual world had already taken over his existence. He asks the bulldog what he should do, feeling the weight of the responsibility to protect someone who is as much a victim as himself. Heesu shows the scars on her hands, marks of failed rituals and a constant struggle against the darkness trying to devour her from within. The mirror in the room reflects not only the young pair, but the shadows dancing around them, ready to make their next move. Yongjin sighs, his exhaustion overflowing in every word as he accepts that there's no escape from this new and bizarre dark reality. His phone vibrates, a reminder of the normal world that now seems like a distant, colorless memory compared to the magnitude of the supernatural. Heesu explains that Yongjin is what they call a vessel, a body capable of harboring gods and monsters with the same dangerous ease. She looks at the device, perhaps wishing her only worry was a text message instead of a relentless spiritual hunt. The bulldog confirms the theory, explaining that Yongjin's aura is like a beacon in the night for all the hungry spirits in the city. The image of the masked spirit reappears, a visual reminder that the primordial ancestor is the only thing preventing total consumption. Meanwhile, out on the streets, night advances and shadows sharpen, hiding creatures that await the moment of weakness. The clock on the wall ticks away the hours, each second a step closer to a confrontation Yongjin still doesn't feel ready for. Heesu asks to stay, explaining that her presence can help mask his energy, creating a kind of temporary spiritual shield. The young man looks at her, seeing the vulnerability beneath her practitioner's facade, and feels a pang of guilt for his earlier behavior. He admits he thought he was going crazy, that the voices and visions were the result of a mind broken by school stress. Heesu smiles sadly, assuring him that madness would be a much gentler fate than the truth they now obligatorily share. She approaches, her eyes shining with renewed determination, ready to teach him the basic rules of survival in this chaos. The bulldog snorts, finding it amusing how destiny united two such improbable beings to carry the burden of an almost forgotten lineage. Heesu begins to explain about the Jin and how spiritual energy should be molded, using examples Yongjin desperately tries to understand now. She moves with agility, demonstrating that knowledge is not just theoretical, but something engraved in her muscles through years of pain. Yongjin watches her, feeling for the first time that he is not alone in this war, that there is someone who understands his deepest fear. The bulldog interrupts, reminding them that hospitality has limits and that they need a real plan before the sun rises. Moonlight bathes the room, creating dramatic contrasts that emphasize the seriousness of the situation they are neck-deep in. Heesu picks up a bowl of water, her reflection shimmering on the liquid surface as if it were a portal to another time and place. She dips her hands, performing a small purification ritual to appease the lesser spirits that always lurk around human dwellings. The focus on her hands reveals the delicacy and strength of someone forced to mature too quickly under the whip of fear. Yongjin asks why the creatures pursue him with such fury, wanting to understand why he is these monsters' preferred target. Heesu responds enigmatically, suggesting that what he carries within himself is the spirit underworld's most valuable treasure. The young man looks at his own chest, imagining the energy the bulldog calls his inheritance, feeling it pulse like an untamable second heart. The canine intervenes, explaining that an untrained vessel is merely easy prey waiting to be devoured by any wandering spirit. Yongjin feels a chill down his spine, realizing that his life now depends on mastering something he can barely rationally comprehend or accept. He stands, determined not to be merely a victim, while Heesu encourages him with a silent, faith-filled nod. She begins to recount her childhood, about how her mother became devoted to an entity everyone believed to be a god. The bulldog sits, listening to the story with an expression that mixes curiosity and an ancestral knowledge of Shadow's deceptive nature. Heesu describes the temple where she grew up, a place that should have been sacred, but which became a prison of talismans and whispers. She tells how people came from afar in search of miracles, unaware they were feeding something terribly hungry and malicious there. The canine comments that many humans confuse power with divinity, allowing monsters to enter their lives disguised as saviors or protectors. The girl recounts the day she realized her mother was no longer the same, that something had stolen her soul. Her voice falters for a moment, the pain of loss still fresh, despite the years that have passed since that fateful day. She remembers seeing the creature for the first time, a shadowy form hiding behind her progenitor's gentle smile. We see Heesu's mother in traditional attire, an imposing figure exuding a spiritual authority that intimidated everyone in the village. She performed complex rituals under the scorching sun, seeking the spiritual perfection that promised to bring peace and prosperity to all devotees. The temple was crowded with devotees begging for blessings, ignoring the price being paid behind the scenes of that sacred performance. Heesu, still small, observed everything with wide eyes, sensing that something was deeply wrong with her beloved mother's fervent prayers. Then, the vision of a blood-mouthed spirit emerges as a warning of what was to come in that cursed place. The image of her mother crying blood cuts through the narrative, revealing the internal torment of one who voluntarily surrendered to a devouring force. Heesu recounts how she tried to warn, how she tried to save the person she loved most, but her words were dismissed as childish delusions. Today, the marks on her body and the bandages are constant reminders that evil does not give up what it considers its property. The bulldog sighs, acknowledging the tragedy of a shaman lineage that fell from grace by trying to control the uncontrollable for so long. He looks at Yongjin, who now seems to understand that Heesu's fight is an extension of the war he has just inherited. Heesu adjusts her bandages, a mechanical gesture that hides a deep anxiety about what tomorrow holds for the two of them. The canine affirms that his protection now extends to the girl, as she has proven herself a loyal and courageous ally in the field. Yongjin agrees, feeling a new sense of purpose awaken in his chest, going beyond the simple selfish desire to survive alone. They form a silent pact in the dark room, three souls bound by the burden of a past that refuses to stay buried. Meanwhile, in a distant, mist-shrouded place, voices whisper Heesu's name, calling her back to the darkness. She shivers and grips her arm, knowing that her mother, or what remains of her, is still relentlessly hunting her. Yongjin offers a glass of water, trying to be the support she clearly needs after reliving such painful and cruel memories. Heesu accepts, sitting down carefully, the weight of spiritual exhaustion evident in every slow, deliberate movement she makes. They discuss the possibility of being attacked again, and the bulldog warns that the creature they now possess is far more cunning. Heesu explains that her mother won't come alone, that she commands a legion of lesser spirits who serve as her eyes and ears. Yongjin clenches his fists, the anger against these entities growing within him, transforming his fear into cold, sharp determination. He swears he won't let anything happen to her while she's under his protection, a promise that shines with the energy of Jin. Heesu looks at him, surprised by the change in attitude of the young man who once seemed to want only to flee from everything and everyone. They know that rest will be short, and that the next battle will define if they have any real chance against absolute evil. The bulldog settles at the foot of the bed, assuming his vigil form, his eyes glowing in the darkness like two burning, watchful embers. He warns that the scent of fear attracts predators, and that they need to keep their minds clear and their hearts steady in the face of horror. Yongjin tries to close his eyes, but the images of monsters and rituals dance across his eyelids like a nightmare that won't end. Heesu remains seated, watching the window where the moon seems to weep a silver light over the city that ignores the imminent danger. In the silence of the night, Heesu's eyes close for an instant, and she is transported back to the day of the bloody ritual. She sees the hand holding the ritualistic knife, the steel gleaming under the candlelight as blood flowed down the stone altar. Unknown voices chanted forbidden mantras, creating a vibration that seemed to tear the fabric of reality itself around the small girl. The silhouette of a colossal spirit emerges from the shadows, its suffocating presence extinguishing all light and hope from that sacred chamber. The monster extends its hand towards her, but her mother interposes herself, a final act of love before being consumed. With that, talismans scattered across the floor ignite with a black flame, signaling that the divine protection has been definitively shattered. Heesu sees her own bloodied fists, remembering how she fought to escape that nightmare which had become her daily life. Traditional clothes hanging on the wall seem like ghosts watching over her sleep, reminders of a heritage she never wished to bear. Every detail of the room now seems charged with sinister meaning, as if the very house itself were beginning to rebel against them. She weeps silently, tears streaming down her cheeks as she wonders if she will ever find the peace she so desperately yearns for. A shadowy silhouette projects onto the wall behind her, a manifestation of her own guilt and the fear she tries to hide from Yongjin. A close-up on her face reveals a pain that words cannot describe, the agony of a daughter who lost her mother to a monster. She clenches her teeth, and sadness transforms into a spark of hatred against the spirit that destroyed her family and childhood. Visions of strangers consumed by the same darkness flash through her mind, reminding her that the spiritual world is vast and relentless. She knows that what happened in the alley was merely the beginning, a test of strength for what truly awaits in this war. The ancestral bulldog watches her suffering, his canine expression concealing a compassion he rarely displays. Candles lit around a shadowy figure symbolize the hope Heesu still clings to, however fragile and small it may seem. A hand scatters rice over the table, a gesture of purification that Heesu mentally repeats to try and ward off the dark thoughts that plague her. The rice spreads like stars in a dark sky, each grain a silent prayer for protection and strength to face the coming day. She touches the grains, feeling the earth's energy, trying to ground herself in reality before her mind is consumed by absolute fear. The image of a shadowy woman sitting before Buddha statues appears, representing the corruption of the sacred that Heesu witnessed in her own home. The statues seem to mock the situation, their impassive faces witnessing the downfall of a lineage once glorious and filled with divine light. Back in the present, the sun begins to rise on the horizon, bringing with it the promise of a new day fraught with new and terrifying challenges. Yongjin sleeps deeply for a few minutes, exhaustion finally conquering his agitated mind and broken body. He awakens to the faint barking of the bulldog, a sign that rest time is over and the real world demands his attention. He checks his phone, realizing that time has flown by too quickly and that normal routine still futilely tries to pull him back. The young man stands, feeling his muscles stiff, yet the Jin pulses in his veins like an engine that never stops running. He walks to the bathroom door, hearing the sound of running water, a sign that Heesu is already awake and preparing. Upon opening the door, he finds the girl brushing her teeth, a scene of domestic normalcy that feels utterly surreal. Heesu looks at him through the mirror, her face still marked by bandages, but her eyes reveal a clarity that wasn't there the night before. Yongjin looks away, feeling a bit awkward with the sudden intimacy that destiny had forged between them. The bulldog enters the bathroom too, making a remark about how humans waste time with such superficial cleansing rituals. The sun shines brightly outside, illuminating the city as it awakens to another ordinary day, unaware that its heroes are in tatters. They prepare to leave, Yongjin donning his usual black hoodie, trying to appear as inconspicuous as possible while carrying an ancestor in dog form. Heesu walks beside him, her posture firmer, demonstrating that the previous night's conversation has given her a new foundation to fight. They discuss what they need to buy, and the normalcy of grocery shopping serves as a necessary anchor for both their mental sanities. The girl smiles at him, a gesture that warms Yongjin's heart in a way he hadn't expected to feel so soon. The bulldog complains that they should be focused on training the Jin, not on choosing ramen brands or cereals in the aisle. Yongjin ignores him, focused on ensuring Heesu feels safe and well cared for, assuming his role as protector with a newfound seriousness. The streetlight pole seems to watch them, a familiar shadow reminding the young man that creatures could be anywhere. He throws out the trash, a trivial gesture that closes the chapter of the previous night as they walk towards the local market. Yongjin observes the pedestrians, wondering how many of them also hide secrets or are haunted by ghosts no one else can see. Heesu notices his distraction and gently touches his arm, reminding him that they need to stay focused on the present to survive the future. Yongjin's face brightens slightly. He begins to accept that his life has changed forever, and that perhaps it's not entirely bad. They enter the market, and the air conditioning and bright lights create a safe environment that momentarily pushes away the spiritual darkness. A couple in suits passes them, discussing office problems that now seem so trivial and distant to the two young warriors. Heesu looks at the products, carefully choosing what they need, her practitioner's mind always evaluating the energetic properties of everything she sees. They walk through the aisles, their dynamic becoming more natural, almost as if they were old friends sharing a common routine. The focus on their feet shows the synchronized rhythm of their walk, a union strengthening with every step taken on that sunny morning. Heesu asks Yongjin about his future plans, forcing him to think about something beyond immediate survival. He hesitates, realizing he hadn't thought about tomorrow in a long time, his mind trapped in an eternal cycle of exhaustion and fear. The girl suggests they can change things, that his lineage doesn't have to be just a curse, but a tool for good. They stop before the candy shelf, and Yongjin chooses a package for Heesu, a small gesture of affection that makes her blush slightly. The conversation lightens. They laugh at something silly, allowing themselves a moment of pure humanity before the war calls them once more. Yongjin feels that for the first time in years he has something to fight for, someone worth the effort of mastering the Jin. He thanks him for the gesture, her eyes shining with a gratitude that goes beyond the candy, reaching the very soul of the young man who took her in. He realizes that the strength he received from the primal ancestor isn't just for slaying monsters, but for protecting these small moments of peace. The bulldog snorts, but there's a glint of approval in his eyes, seeing that his descendant is finally finding his own path and purpose. They head to the checkout, the bag full of supplies representing their resilience and their will to keep living, despite everything. As they leave the market, the sunlight hits them directly, like a baptism of hope for the difficult journey that awaits them. Heesu looks up at the blue sky, taking a deep breath of the morning air, feeling free for the first time since she fled her haunted home. Yongjin walks beside her, his hood now down, facing the world head-on, fearless of the shadows he knows will come. Just then, he spots a familiar figure at the end of the street, a stark reminder that the past is never truly dead, merely waiting for the right moment. He tightens his grip on the bag strap, his senses on high alert, the Jin beginning to warm his muscles for a possible imminent new battle. Strangers pass them by, but Yongjin now sees them differently, as people he has a duty to protect from the encroaching darkness. He exchanges a knowing glance with Heesu, both aware that their partnership is the only thing keeping them standing against evil. They continue walking, the city's silhouette in the background serving as the stage for the modern epic they are about to write together. Heesu smiles again, an image of purity and strength etched into Yongjin's mind as his greatest incentive not to give up. But in the shadows of a nearby alley, Red Eyes watch their every move, signaling that the calm is merely the prelude to a devastating storm. Doubt gleams in Heesu's eyes as Yongjin questions the need for so many provisions, fearing his empty pockets won't be able to cover it. But the girl smiles, revealing a card holding a fortune of 10 million won, settlement money that utterly shocks the young man. The sound of automatic doors opening marks the end of their shopping bubble, as the morning sun hits their tired faces. Yongjin lets out a heavy sigh, admitting he'd never bought so many groceries in his entire difficult life, carrying the physical weight of the bags. Heesu's ever observant notices his skill and comments that the young man must be a master chef, but he deflects with modesty. She laughs, saying it would take a special talent to make such good ingredients taste bad as they walk side by side down the bustling sidewalk. Suddenly, Yongjin's world freezes. A mental alarm blares as he spots someone who should never have been there at that exact moment. A bespectacled classmate, engrossed in his phone, walks past distractedly, unaware that he's about to change the course of that quiet morning. The young man's eyes widen behind his lenses when he finally notices Yongjin's presence, accompanied by an unknown girl. The shock is immediate, and the thought that Yongjin, the most isolated guy in school, has a girlfriend, begins to spread like wildfire. Heesu merely smiles, amused by the situation, completely oblivious to the social chaos that Simple Image is about to unleash upon his life. The blue sky and white clouds silently observe the mundane drama unfolding on the city streets, oblivious to the invisible danger. Yongjin runs, sweat pouring as his mind tries to process why Lim Jayol was in that place, ruining his disguise of normalcy. He stops, catching his breath, thinking of Heesu and the chaos she caused simply by existing by his side in public, sighing in frustration. The thought of her returning home alone calms him for a moment, but fate has already begun to move its cruel pieces. On his phone screen, the group chat explodes. Jayol's notifications mock the situation, marking Yongjin as the center of unwanted attention. He stares at the device, feeling the weight of his peers' judgment as he realizes his secret life is perilously close to being exposed. His feet pound the asphalt with urgency, but the city's rhythm seems to hide something darker than mere school's gossip. As he enters the alley, Yongjin's shadow stretches, and an overwhelming presence begins to materialize right behind him, draining the ambient light. An immense dark phantom emerges, a silhouette that doesn't belong to the world of the living, observing the empty vessel with a latent spiritual hunger. The alley becomes a tunnel of isolation, where the street noise vanishes and only the sound of the young man's ragged breathing fills the air. He spins around abruptly, his instincts screaming danger, but what hits him isn't a ghost but something far more physical and unexpected. A soccer ball slices through the air with violent force, hitting Yongjin's face with a dry impact that throws him backward. Rage instantly boils. He recovers from the blow, searching for the culprit, as pain throbs in his nose, and his patience wears thin. Before him, a group of small children watches the scene, and a black-haired boy with an icy gaze holds an equipment bag. The boy shows no fear or remorse, merely staring at Yongjin with a coldness that seems not to belong to someone his age. Yongjin demands to know if he was the one who kicked the ball, but the atmosphere shifts when the stranger responds with a short, enigmatic warning. "Be careful," the boy says, as the small children hide behind him, as if they know something Yongjin still ignores. The young man's irritation grows. He asks who should be careful and why, but the boy merely ignores him, maintaining his air of superiority. The contrast is bizarre, an irritated teenager confronting a somber child in the middle of the asphalt, under the watchful eyes of small, doll-like beings. The boy approaches, his eyes as black as an abyss fixed on Yongjin, repeating that the danger doesn't come from him, but from what surrounds him. Yongjin is left speechless by that intensity, feeling that there's something profoundly wrong with that boy, an aura that makes his hair stand on end. Without another word, the group retreats, leaving Yongjin alone with his bags and a sense of foreboding he can't shake. Meanwhile, Heesu walks down another street, her thoughts fixed on the future and the protection the Ancestral Bulldog promised her. She stops for an instant, a shiver running down her spine, the sparkle in her eyes faltering before an overwhelming sense of being watched. A tall, shadowy figure appears in her path, blocking the sunlight, emanating a murderous intent that makes the air suffocating. The entity's feet, deformed and grayish, touch the ground with a supernatural weight, signaling that a spiritual predator has finally reached its most desired prey. The bag of sweets falls, scattering treats across the asphalt like lost drops of hope amidst the cold, indifferent concrete of the great city. The urban landscape, once vibrant, now seems a prison of bricks and shadows, where Heesu's fate is being decided by ancestral forces. In the refuge of the room, the ancestral bulldog jolts awake, his guardian instincts setting off a red alert he cannot ignore. He growls, sensing that the balance has been broken, and that the girl he swore to protect is in imminent danger at the hands of shadows. Yongjin enters the room, carrying groceries, but the dog greets him with a direct question charged with urgency. Where is she? The young man tries to deflect, saying she'd be back soon, but the bulldog's stern expression makes him realize something terrible has already happened. He looks at the bag of vegetables in his hand, reality beginning to crumble as the silence of the room becomes psychological torture. The dog insists, his authoritative voice echoing within the four walls, demanding Yongjin understand the gravity of having left Heesu unprotected. Panic begins to set in the young man's heart. He drops everything and grabs his phone, attempting a connection that fate has already severed. The bulldog watches his descendants despair, his eyes gleaming with an ancient wisdom that has already foreseen the worst possible scenarios. Yongjin's quickened pace crushes the asphalt dust as he runs back into the streets, regret burning like acid in his veins. He retraces his steps, searching for any sign, any clue of the girl who became his only link to a future of real hope. Every corner seems a trap, every shadow an enemy, as he shouts her name amidst the deafening noise of the city that never stops. Finally, he sees her, Heesu's silhouette standing in the middle of a dark alley, as if she had been waiting for him all along. Yongjin rushes toward her relieved, but the relief dies before he even gets close, when he notices the unnatural stiffness of her posture. "Where have you been?" she asks, but her voice sounds hollow, distorted, as if something were using the girl's vocal cords like a puppet. As he approaches, he notices her smile, a smile too wide, too cruel, revealing teeth that seem sharp and eyes that gleam. Yongjin recoils, his heart pounding against his ribs, realizing that the creature before him is merely a shell used by something much older. The entity tilts its head, mocking his concern, and for a brief moment its red eyes reveal the malice of a god hungry for souls. "Who are you?" he roars, but the answer is a dry crack, the sound of bones breaking and flesh transforming into something monstrous. Heesu's image shatters like glass, revealing the true face of the terror that has hunted him from the beginning, a nightmare of teeth and shadows. On the ground, the monster's feet firmly plant, claws tearing the asphalt as the transformation completes in a grotesque display of spiritual power and hatred. The creature advances, and Yongjin feels the weight of Jin begin to circulate in his body, an instinctive survival reaction he barely controls. The monster roars, a sound seemingly from the depths of hell, shaking the structure of the surrounding buildings and silencing the very night wind. However, before the final blow is struck, an imposing figure emerges from the shadows, an elder with a white beard and eyes full of light. He observes the scene with masterful disdain, his presence enough to make the creature hesitate, recognizing a force that transcends time. Yongjin is paralyzed, caught between two powers he doesn't understand, as his mind struggles not to succumb to the madness of that confrontation. The white bulldog appears leaping through the shadows with an agility that defies his physical form, barking a challenge that echoes through the alley. He places himself before Yongjin, a small barrier of courage and heritage, against the abyss threatening to swallow the last descendant of his lineage. "What are you doing here?" the dog asks the shadowy figure, his voice laden with an authority that demands immediate and truthful answers. The elder smiles enigmatically as the surrounding environment begins to vibrate with an energy that makes space-time itself seem fragile. The ground beneath their feet cracks, releasing vapors of spiritual energy that coil like hungry snakes around the combatant's legs. The bulldog prepares to attack, every muscle tense, ready to tear the throat of anyone who dares touch his spiritual air. But the tension is interrupted by a childish laugh. The alley boy, Jin, appears again, observing the impending destruction with an almost morbid pleasure. He walks calmly, hands in his pockets, acting as if he were the true master of this game of life and death now unfolding. The boy looks at the bulldog and asks a question that chills the dog's blood. "How did you manage to break the seal that way?" The silence that follows is absolute, broken only by Yongjin's heavy breathing, who watches everything without being able to move a muscle. Jin smiles again, and everyone realizes that he is not just a boy but a vessel for something vast, ancient, and extremely dangerous. The world around them begins to dissolve, the walls of the buildings becoming smoke as reality gives way to a gray spiritual plane. Indistinct figures begin to emerge in the fog, lost souls drawn by the massive energy emanating from the confrontation between the bulldog and Jin. Yongjin feels the Jin in his hands grow hot, a golden flame struggling to break free and protect its owner from the darkness surrounding him. But the boy's strength is overwhelming. With a simple gesture, he creates a barrier of cold air that violently throws the bulldog backward. The dog rolls on the ground but immediately gets up, his eyes burning with a fury that could set the very sky ablaze. "You are merely a remnant," Jin says, his voice now sounding like the chorus of 1,000 ancient voices speaking through a single child. The alley is engulfed in an explosion of light and shadow, a duel of wills that makes Yongjin's sanity teeter on the edge of the abyss. The boy opens a traditional fan, an object that radiates a bluish, icy aura, capable of sealing destinies and destroying spiritual essences with a single breath. Every movement of Jin is a deadly dance, a choreography of destruction that the bulldog desperately tries to block with his own ancestral energy. But the white-bearded elder intervenes, his hand landing on the boy's shoulder, disrupting the flow of energy with terrifying calm. "It's not time yet," the old man murmurs, and with those words, reality begins to recompose itself, bringing them back to the filthy alley. Yongjin collapses to his knees, his chest heaving, watching the two beings vanish into the morning mist as if they had never existed there. The bulldog snorts, visibly exhausted, admitting to himself that the war he so feared has not only begun, but they are already losing. "We have to find Heesu," the dog says, but the task seems impossible now that forces of such magnitude have entered the deadly game. Yongjin rises, his gaze transformed. Passivity died in that alley, replaced by a cold determination to rescue the only person who believed in him. He walks, ignoring the pain, following a spiritual trail that only he as the empty vessel can feel vibrating in the city's dense air. The trail leads him away from the main streets, towards an abandoned industrial zone where time seems to have stopped decades ago. The silence there is different. It's not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that devours every noise. A barrier of absolute isolation. In the center of a ruined warehouse, an ancient wooden structure emerges, a construction that shouldn't be there, yet it imposes itself. It's a traditional cabin, surrounded by protective seals and incense, burning with a nauseating purple smoke, dulling Yongjin's senses. He crosses the threshold, and the temperature drops sharply, the air becoming so cold that each exhale transforms into a cloud of ice. Inside, the scene is a nightmare. Straw sacks, tied with thick ropes, are lined up on the floor like corpses awaiting their final burial. Yongjin advances, heart pounding, searching for the sack holding Heesu, fearing what he might find when he finally opens that prison of plant fibers. But before he can act, a shadowy voice echoes through the wooden ceiling beams, a lullaby that sounds like a condemnation. It's Mangtae's grandfather, the legendary entity who kidnaps disobedient children to transform them into something far darker and more terrible. The figure materializes from the shadows, holding a butcher's knife that gleams with a malevolent light, reflecting the despair in the young man's eyes. "Have you come for the feast?" the spirit asks, its face a mask of wrinkles and cruel intentions that defy human logic itself. Yongjin tries to summon Jin, but the cabin's atmosphere neutralizes his powers, leaving him vulnerable like a lamb before a hungry ancient wolf. He is struck by an invisible blow and everything goes dark. The last image he sees is the old man approaching with the blade raised against him. Time loses all meaning, and what follows is the descent into an abyss of fragmented consciousness and latent physical pain in his limbs. Despair reaches new heights when Yongjin opens his eyes and realizes his vision is limited by the tight weaves of a straw sack. He tries to move, but his body is bound, each escape attempt only tightening the knots that tie him to that terrible reality. The cabin ceiling, covered in yellow paper talismans, seems to mock his captivity, while the sound of something being sharpened fills his ears. It's the knife. The rhythmic sound of metal against the sharpening stone is an hourglass, counting the final minutes of his earthly life. Yongjin looks to the side and sees another human form trapped in a sack identical to his own, the weak breathing indicating that Heesu is also there. She is crying, silent tears streaming down her face as she stares at the ceiling with an expression of acceptance that breaks Yongjin's heart. "Shoo!" he whispers, but his voice barely emerges, choked by fear and the straw dust entering his lungs with each breath. Mangtae's grandfather approaches, his silhouette projected against the faint light of an oil lantern, resembling a giant from Korean folklore nightmares. He murmurs about wicked children and a lack of filial piety, a sick obsession he uses to justify the atrocities he is about to commit. And he raises the knife ready to deliver the final blow as darkness swallows what little hope remains. Those who don't respect their parents become food, the old man declares, his bony hand caressing the blade he just prepared. Yongjin tries to scream that he has no parents, that his lineage is a curse, but the old man merely laughs, finding his denial proof of guilt. Heesu tries to intervene, her voice trembling as she pleads for mercy, but her words fall on ears that only hear the call of blood and salt. The old man crouches beside them, the smell of mold and death emanating from his ancient clothes, watching his victims like a cook observes ingredients. He details the process, first the salt, then the thyme, and finally the transformation into jokgal, the fermented food of the hungry spirits of the underworld. Yongjin feels the first handful of salt fall onto his face, the crystals burning skins and reminding him that his humanity is being drained. Every grain that touches the floor makes a sound that echoes like thunder in the young man's mind, a sign that the ritual has already begun and there is no return. Heesu closes her eyes, murmuring prayers her mother taught her, but the gods seem deaf in that cabin, forgotten by time and light. The old man sings a macabre song as he spreads the salt over the sacks, a melody that numbs the senses and prepares the soul for its definitive departure. Seeing Heesu in that state because of him is a pain that surpasses any blade's cut. Shame and fear intertwine in Yongjin's heart. He tries to fight against the ropes, his muscles burning with the effort, but the straw is reinforced with spiritual magic that gradually drains his life force. The old man's face lights up with insane glee, the lantern's light reflecting in his white eyes, devoid of any trace of human compassion. A good child would prove their virtue, he says, brandishing the knife before Yongjin's eyes, challenging the young man to show something he doesn't possess. Heesu screams that they are good children, that they deserve the rice cake promised in legends, trying to use the logic of the old man's own madness. The elder pauses, his knife millimeters from the girl's throat, considering her words with a sudden curiosity that brings a flicker of hope. Prove it, he challenges, his voice returning to a dangerous whisper that makes the cabin's beams creak under the weight of his malevolent will. Yongjin looks at Heesu, a gaze that says everything he never dared to speak, an apology and a promise to fight to the very end. He rolls to the side, trying to use his body weight to topple the old man, but the entity is like a rock, unmoving and cold as ice. Heesu writhes in her sack, trying to reach something in her nearby fallen backpack, her only chance to use a protective seal against the monster. The old man notices the movement, and his mood instantly shifts to blind fury, his eyes glowing with a red light that illuminates the cabin. "Damn you!" he roars, and the impact of his voice slams both sacks against the wall with a force that knocks the air from Yongjin's lungs. The young man tastes blood in his mouth, his vision blurring as he fights not to pass out again before certain cruel death. The elder rises, his figure stretching until he touches the ceiling, his shadow swallowing all the lantern light in an act of absolute dominance. He raises the knife one last time, ready to complete the ritual and transform the two souls into food for the shadow gods he serves. Denying your parents is the ultimate crime, the spirit pronounces as the blade begins its slow, torturous descent towards the young man. Heesu screams, a sound that tears at Yongjin's soul, and for an instant, the jinn within him explodes in a golden light that rips through the sack's ropes. He rises, straw flying like black snow, his eyes now glowing with the power of the primordial ancestor that awakened in his moment of death. The old man recoils, shocked by the sudden manifestation of a lineage he thought had been extinguished centuries ago by his own bloody hand. Yongjin is no longer the exhausted young man from the market. He is the vessel filled with 1,000 years of fury and the duty to protect those he loves. He lunges, his hands enveloped in spiritual flames, delivering a blow that shakes the cabin to its rotten wooden foundations and old seals. But the Mangtae elder recovers, his form becoming a dense mist that absorbs the impact and counterattacks with whips of dark, icy energy. The battle within the small cabin is a symphony of light and shadow, a duel that decides not only their lives, but the balance of power in the city. Yongjin reaches Heesu, tearing her sack with a single jin charge movement, freeing the girl from her prison of straw and pure despair. She falls into his arms, weak and trembling, but her eyes show that her will has not yet been broken by the terror they experience together inside. The old spirit laughs, a cackle that sounds like 1,000 cemetery gates creaking shut at once on the living who dare to fight. "You cannot escape your destiny," he declares as the cabin begins to close in on them, the walls becoming solid and impenetrable as iron. Yongjin embraces Heesu, his body serving as a shield against the debris and malevolent energy the spirit hurls at them with renewed hatred. He looks at the ceiling, seeing the talismans begin to glow with a black light, signaling that the spirit's true power is about to be fully unleashed. "I won't let you take her," the young man shouts, his voice imbued with a conviction that makes the darkness itself recoil for a brief, glorious moment. He prepares a final attack, concentrating all his remaining jin into his fist, an explosion of energy that promises to reduce the cabin to ashes and smoke. The Mangtae elder advances, his knife gleaming with insatiable bloodlust. Two powers are about to collide in a devastating and definitive climax. A blinding light assaults everyone's vision for an eternal second, a vacuum of sound and color where only the will to survive matters. When the dust settles, the cabin is silent, the spirit has vanished, but the threat still hangs in the air like the smell of sulfur and burnt salt. Heesu looks at an old photo on the floor, an image of her mother that the elder kept, realizing the connection between them is deeper than she imagined. Yongjin helps her up, both wounded and exhausted, but alive in a world that tried to devour them with the force of forgotten and malevolent legends. They emerge into the morning light, which now seems cold and strange, realizing that the spiritual war that began in the market will never have an easy end. Yongjin's gaze hardens as he sees a new silhouette on the horizon, knowing this was just the first of many nightmares he will have to face. He gives the final order, a sentence that sounds like the creak of a tomb. "Wait here in absolute silence." With that, the old spirit withdraws, closing the door with a dry click that echoes through the rotten wooden walls and ancient seals. Kwon, Yongjin, and Lee Heesu remain there, trapped in their straw sacks, as despair begins to corrode what little sanity they have left. Any wrong move could be their last, but the instinct to survive screams louder than the paralyzing fear. Heesu whispers with a trembling voice, revealing that this place is not just an ordinary cabin, it is her family sanctuary. Yongjin is shocked by the information, his eyes wide, trying to process how the horror they are now experiencing is linked to the girl's past. She laments, feeling that fate has finally caught up to them, and that there may be no escape from the dark path they chose. The young man tries to remain calm, questioning why she is so desperate if they intended to come here anyway. It turns out the reality is much crueler, and being here without protection is like voluntarily surrendering to the embrace of death. He asks for the sword, for the weapon that could save them, but Heesu's answer is a punch to the gut. It was left behind. Worse still, the Ancestral Bulldog has also disappeared, leaving the two teenagers completely vulnerable in a den of bloodthirsty monsters. Heesu gesticulates frantically, asking if Yongjin can't use that power again, that energy he manifested earlier with his hands. He looks at her as if she's gone mad, retorting if she thinks their lives have turned into a damn comic book now. The frustration is palpable, but there's no time for arguments when every passing second brings them closer to a terrible and eternal fate. The goal now is simple, but almost impossible. Get out of there immediately before the Mangtae elder returns to finish the job. However, the door is guarded, and the fear of running into that decrepit old man makes Yongjin's blood run cold. He calls her name, a whisper laden with urgency, as they begin to crawl like captives trying to break their invisible chains. Every inch gained is a victory against terror, but the sound of straw scraping on the floor seems like thunder in that silence. Heesu points to an opening, a path that could be salvation or just a new chamber of horrors waiting for them. They advance with extreme caution, bare feet touching the cold floor as the spiritual dust gleams under the faint candlelight. Yongjin feels a change in the environment, a menacing aura that begins to manifest as they delve into the depths of the forbidden sanctuary. His eyes widen at the bizarre and macabre opulence that reveals itself, a stark contrast to the rot outside. A silhouette forms in the shadows, a presence that makes the hairs on any living being's neck stand on end instantly. They are utterly shocked when they see the paintings on the walls, representations of gods and demons that seem to watch their every move. It is a place of ancient power, where the veil between worlds is so thin that reality itself seems on the verge of tearing apart. A figure clad in crimson emerges like a flame in the darkness, exuding an authority that demands total and immediate submission. Yongjin and Heesu freeze, their bodies refusing to obey as their minds struggle to process the new threat unfolding before them. Everything they knew about the spiritual world is put to the test in this instant where life and death dance in twisted harmony. The sanctuary vibrates with an unknown energy, a power emanating from relics that should have remained forever forgotten beneath the earth. Heesu recognizes the attire, the decorations, and the horror on her face suggests that the danger is now far greater than before. Shapes move in the gloom, creatures that shouldn't exist on the physical plane, whispering promises of pain and suffering to the invaders. The woman in traditional attire observes the young man with a look of utter disdain, as if he were merely an insignificant insect in her path. Yongjin feels the weight of this presence, a spiritual pressure that threatens to shatter his bones and crush his will to continue fighting. Heesu tries to speak, but the words die in her throat before the image she sees, an image that defies all logic. The tension is almost solid, a silent duel where the first to avert their gaze will be the one to lose everything, even their soul. The woman advances with predatory elegance, every movement exuding an aura of danger that would make even the bravest warrior recoil. Heesu seems on the verge of collapse, her gaze lost between recognition and absolute terror before that familiar yet strange figure. Yongjin tries to step between them, but his body feels heavy as if submerged in molten lead, preventing any effective defensive reaction. The girl extends her hand, a gesture of supplication, or perhaps just a reflex from someone who refuses to believe what she sees. But the entity shows no compassion, its expression remaining a cold, impenetrable porcelain mask under the lantern light. The words that escape Heesu's mouth are a desperate whisper, an attempt to reach whatever remains of humanity within that being. The woman in the red hanbok smiles, but it is a smile devoid of warmth, the kind of smile that precedes an inevitable massacre. The sanctuary seems to close in on them, the walls adorned with tigers and Buddhas becoming a gilded cage from which there is no escape. Yongjin questions the identity of that woman, sensing that she is the key to the mystery surrounding his companion's cursed lineage. The answer comes in the form of a heavy silence, broken only by the crackle of flames illuminating the macabre paintings and altars. Heesu is in profound shock, her mind fracturing at the sight of someone she thought she had lost or never known. The young man realizes they have fallen into a far more sophisticated trap where family ties are used as chains to bind them. The woman finally speaks, and her voice carries the echo of centuries of rituals and sacrifices made in the name of forgotten gods. Heesu recoils, tears beginning to stream down her face as she pleads for an explanation she may never receive. Yongjin hardens his gaze, searching for any weakness in that overwhelming presence, but finds only an abyss of pure, unrestrained spiritual power. The entity observes the young man with malicious curiosity, recognizing in him the potential of a vessel that could shift the balance of power. Suddenly, the atmosphere sharply shifts as shadows begin to crawl across the floor, emerging from every dark corner of that sacred and profane chamber. The woman gestures, and the shadows obey, becoming extensions of her dark will that seek to engulf the two young people in a deadly embrace. Yongjin tries to react, but the spiritual paralysis is complete, leaving him merely a spectator to his own tragic and impending fate. She declares that the time for pity is over, and that sacrifices must now be made to satisfy the hunger of the ancestors. The authority in her voice makes the very flames of the lanterns tremble, as if even the light feared what was about to unfold. The young man feels the jinn in his blood boil, an instinctive reaction to the external threat attempting to invade his body and mind. Invisible icy hands begin to grasp his legs, pulling him down into the depths where eternal oblivion eagerly awaits him. He struggles against the spiritual gravity, every muscle aching under the superhuman effort to resist that force which emanates directly from hell. Faceless, ghostly entities emerge around him, whispering in an ancient tongue that only the dead should be able to comprehend. The woman in the hanbok watches his struggle with sadistic pleasure, feeding on the fear and determination he desperately emanates. Suddenly, the ceiling seems to collapse in black energy as Kwon Yongjin is surrounded by shadow creatures seeking his definitive end. She calls him by his full name, an invocation that vibrates through his soul and attempts to subjugate his identity to her will. Heesu screams for him, but her voice seems to come from very far away, muffled by the barrier of malevolent energy that now physically separates them. Yongjin's gaze focuses on the central figure, refusing to accept defeat even as the ground seems to disappear beneath his tired feet. The woman in traditional attire reveals her glowing eyes, a clear sign that she is no longer human, if she ever was. She declares that there is no need for him to visit again, for his journey ends here in this sanctuary that will be his eternal tomb. Just then, a new figure emerges. Mangtae's grandfather reappears, but now he seems small before the power of that mysterious woman. The dynamic among the spirits shifts, revealing a hierarchy of horror where cruelty is the only currency of exchange between entities. The old spirit tries to approach but is repelled by a simple wave of the woman's hand, who treats him like a useless servant. She verbally humiliates him, questioning his competence in maintaining order and capturing the prey he was previously assigned. Yongjin realizes that loyalty among these creatures is non-existent, based solely on fear and submission to raw, overwhelming power. The woman orders Mangtae's grandfather to withdraw, declaring that the matter is now in her much more capable and merciless hands. The white-bearded elder growls in frustration, but the fear he feels for that entity is visible in every wrinkle on his face. He questions her intentions, trying to maintain a shred of dignity before the one who now governs the fate of everyone within. As it turns out, the woman's patience is short, and her response is a spiritual attack that makes the elder fall to his knees, defeated. She raises her hand, and an ancient vase floating in the air glows with a sinister light, ready to imprison anyone who resists. Mangtae's grandfather realizes he has been outmatched and that his only chance of survival is to obey the orders of that sovereign and cruel entity. He steps back, his red eyes glowing with a hatred he dares not manifest physically against his new supreme master. Yongjin and Heesu watch the scene terrified, realizing they've jumped out of the frying pan and into a much hotter fire. A mummy wrapped in white talisman falls from the ceiling, an object of power that the woman uses to seal passages and fate. She controls the object with invisible threads of energy, manipulating reality as if weaving a tapestry of pure pain and despair. With a dry movement, she points to one of the vases on the altar, and the lid opens to reveal a hungry void. The suction force is immediate, pulling the vital essence from the youths as the woman laughs at the futility of their insignificant human struggles. The seal on the vase glows intensely, a spiritual prison designed to contain even the most powerful gods who dared challenge that ancient lineage. She approaches Yongjin, her face mere inches from his, exhaling a scent of ancient incense and fresh cemetery earth. She asks if he hasn't learned manners at home, for his behavior is an offense to the sacredness of that place of power and blood. Heesu tries to intervene, screaming for her to stop, but is silenced by a gaze that seems to rip the voice from her very lungs. The boy in white and the girl in yellow are thrown to the ground, surrounded by gray creatures that immobilize them with sharp claws. Yongjin tastes blood in his mouth, his mind wavering between the present and visions of a past that doesn't belong to him. His hand trembles as he tries to reach for Heesu's, a last heroic effort amid a situation that seems completely lost and hopeless. He curses his own weakness, the burden of being a descendant without full control over the power that flows in his veins. The woman in red mocks him, stating that the royal blood in his veins is being wasted in such a pathetic and fragile body. He glares at her furiously, but his eyes show that his resistance is reaching the absolute limit of his physical and spiritual capacity. She turns to Heesu, changing her tone to something falsely affectionate, which is even more terrifying than her previous explosive fury. The surrounding creatures begin to emit a high-pitched sound, a cacophony of suffering that pierces the ears and makes the brain throb with pain. Yongjin tries to stand one last time, his body enveloped in a pale light as he seeks the last reserves of his spiritual energy. But the woman strikes him with an energy shock, sending him flying against the sanctuary wall with brutal and devastating force. He falls like a sack of potatoes, the breath stolen from his lungs as his vision begins to darken at the edges of his visual field. Heesu cries, calling out to him, but the woman grabs her face, forcing her to look at the disaster she herself caused there. She says the girl must be punished for bringing a stranger into the family's sacred ground without the permission of the elder shamans. It turns out the relationship between them is much darker than a simple mother-daughter bond, hiding generations of secrets. She threatens to put Heesu in a vase too, sealing her forever alongside the other souls who dared to disobey the lineage's dogmas. The boy in white watches the scene with a broken heart, anger replaced by a profound sadness at the endless cruelty. The woman smiles victoriously, feeling that the youth's rebellion has finally been crushed under the weight of her unquestionable divine authority. The sanctuary glows with a reddish light, a premonition that the ritual of punishment is about to begin in all its macabre glory. She declares that their souls will be excellent additions to her collection, serving as eternal guardians of the secret she protects with blood. Her eye gleams with a demonic reflection, revealing the true nature of the entity that possessed that body, or was born from that darkness. The wall decorations seem to come alive, the tigers roaring silently while the divine figures cry tears of black blood over the altar. Yongjin feels a familiar presence approaching, something small but imbued with an authority that makes the woman in red herself hesitate. The white bulldog appears at the threshold of the door, his gaze fixed on the entity with an arrogance that only a true ancestor could possess now. He is not alone. Small divine figures accompany him, bringing with them an aura of light that begins to dissipate the oppressive shadows of the room. The boy feels his strength slowly return, as if the dog's presence were the necessary fuel for his exhausted and wounded soul. He looks at the dog, sensing that the game is not over yet, and that an unexpected turn is about to subvert all expectations. The woman in hanbok smiles again, but this time there is a note of uncertainty on her lips as she observes the new challenger. She asks if the old bulldog has finally decided to appear to defend his protege, or if he only came to witness the inevitable end. The dog responds with a growl that sounds like thunder, a vibration that makes the sanctuary floor tremble and the windows vibrate. Heesu looks at the animal with renewed hope, feeling that the spiritual connection between them is the only anchor keeping them alive there. She realizes that Yongjin's strength is returning, and that the boy will not surrender without a fight that will shake the very foundations. Yongjin drags himself, his fingers digging into the expensive rug as he tries to regain full consciousness and control over his own limbs. Heesu asks if he's okay, but he only focuses on the bulldog, understanding that the Ancestral Master brought the necessary reinforcements for the battle. The boy takes a deep breath, feeling the air carry the Jin energy he had so avoided, but which is now his only weapon against death. He realizes that the paralysis was merely mental, a barrier imposed by the fear the woman had planted in his head from the start. Heesu tries to help him up, but she too is weak, her eyes showing the exhaustion of one who has faced real vivid nightmares. The vision of the woman with skin rotting beneath her hanbok returns to Heesu's mind, a grim reminder of the horror she conceals. She whispers to Yongjin that this thing is not his mother, but an evil spirit called Sangakshi that has taken her form. The shock of the revelation gives the young man the necessary impulse to break the last chains of his mind and rise with renewed fury. He asks why she didn't say it sooner, and the answer is a lament from one who didn't want to burden him with such profound pain. Heesu cries, realizing it might be too late to save what remained of her mother's true essence in that accursed place. Yongjin comforts her with a look, promising they will escape, even if he has to shatter every single vase in that damned sanctuary. The bulldog charges forward, its small form concealing an ancestral power that makes shadows recoil like cowards before the light of the rising sun. The divine children surrounding the dog begin a rhythmic chant, a prayer that strengthens Yongjin's body and purifies the heavy air. Heesu feels the change, her own body recovering vitality as the spiritual music fills the air and wards off death's chill. The Sangakshi screams, her form flickering between illusory beauty and the real Deke she tries to hide beneath her attire. Yongjin rises, his aura shining with an intensity that blinds the lesser creatures who tried to keep him pinned to the ground. He faces the entity, his eyes now firm and resolute, devoid of any doubt or the exhaustion that tormented him moments before. Yongjin declares that her time is up and that he will not allow her to touch Heesu or any other soul there. His fist clenches with joint-cracking force, concentrating all the Jin energy into a single point of pure power. With that, he charges forward but feels Heesu's touch on his shoulder, a silent plea for him not to lose himself in his own fury. She asks if he truly regained his strength, and he replies with a confident smile that illuminates his face, etched by constant battle. He demonstrates his strength by raising his arm, feeling power surge like a river in flood after a long, terrible drought of hope. The Sangakshi attempts one last attack, unleashing whips of dark energy against the young man, but he blocks them with a single arm movement. The impact creates a shockwave that extinguishes half the sanctuary's lanterns, plunging the environment into visual and dramatic suspense. Heesu clings to him, not out of fear, but for support, as they prepare for the final confrontation against the Wicked Lady of Shadows. Her hand trembles, but her will is solid as stone, ready to face the truth about her past and her forbidden shamanic lineage. Yongjin pulls her close, acting as the human shield he swore to be since he entered that dark alley to rescue her from evil. He counts to 3, a signal for both to concentrate their wills into a single effort of escape or a definitive attack against the entity. But the bulldog interrupts, stating that they don't need to flee, for the true power of a descendant lies in confronting what haunts them. Yongjin questions if the dog has gone mad, but realizes the animal knows something he hasn't fully grasped about himself yet. The Songakshi observes their conversation, her hatred growing as she realizes she's lost control over the young man's mind and soul. Heesu looks at the dog and her friend, sensing that the solution to this impasse lies not in brute force, but in the acceptance of destiny. She realizes that the woman in traditional attire is linked to something far greater, a family secret guarded by centuries of silence. Yongjin prepares for the final blow, his body vibrating with an energy that threatens to explode if he doesn't release it against the enemy. However, at the last second, the white bulldog leaps in front of him, barking an order that silences all sounds and paralyzes all actions there. The three divine children smile, revealing that true help has just arrived, leaving the question hanging in the air. Who is the true lord of this sanctuary?